evening, everyone, and welcome to episode 117 of the Retrospectives podcast, Final Fantasy VII. My name is Patrick Arthur, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host James Turlings for this very special episode of the Retrospectives podcast. James, it's happened. After God knows how many episodes, we are once again doing an honest-to-God JRPG.
Insane. I thought this day would never come, honestly, but, people kept asking for something, and we're here to deliver. Thanks for everybody for waiting on us. This one's come out a bit later than we normally do. We just had a bit of, life stuff going on that kept us from this one, but that means we've been able to write a lot of notes for this one. My notes file is bigger than it's ever been, and it's good because FF7's a really long game. And it's one that I've wanted to do for a very long time now. I don't know about you, Patrick, but when I was a kid, I always heard people talking about this game, and I wanted to play it so desperately. But, stores never had it in stock, right? So I think I played every FF7 spin-off that wasn't FF7, itself. I watched the movie, I watched the recap. I consumed a lot of the media about this game, but I never actually got to play the Golden Goose itself, so it's a bit interesting coming onto it 20 years after it was hitting its stride in my life, but we're here now, and I'm glad we got to finally do it.
Yeah, and even me, who isn't as is well documented a fan of JRPGs, while I've not had a particular interest to play this game because I don't like the genre, its reputation is ubiquitous. I knew about the major spoiler in this game. I imagine many others know about the major spoiler of this game. I knew about Cloud. I knew about Barrett and Tifa. I knew their names just because it's almost impossible to exist in the gaming landscape and not be aware of this absolute landmark JRPG. So I was interested in it as a historical relic, if nothing else, even if I wasn't feeling particularly compelled to play it.
Yeah, I think this game is to JRPGs in the West what Dragon Ball was to anime in the West, right? Like, it is the thing that kind of sparked the craze over here, which is...
I mean, it went on to define 3D JRPGs at the very least, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think the gameplay didn't change up drastically from the prior titles, but like the actual, amount of people playing this game over here was just skyrocketed since this game came out. It's pretty cool. I really remember as a kid people talking about this all the damn time.
Yeah, whereas me as a primarily PC gamer, this one was always on the fringes. But I'm glad that we're playing it because the last time we did a JRPG was Lunar Silver Star Story, a game that I absolutely hated. And I felt like that game, it seemed at the time, and from what I've spoken to people about, to be a relatively reasonable representation of what classic JRPGs are. I don't know how true that is, but when I've spoken about it, people are like, yes, this is kind of what games were like at the time, and I hated it. So I feel like this is the next generation of JRPGs, and in many ways you can probably say that the value and quality of Final Fantasy VII will stand in and represent the genre in this era. Does that sound fair?
Yeah, I think it's kind of hard to judge the whole genre with just Luna as a backstory. Like, I picked Luna specifically because I wanted to pick something a bit, out of the way. I think this is the one that you can say, look, they're all kind of like this, and I think that'd be a fair assessment.
Yeah, so it's ready to be judged, and I'm ready to judge it in a very fair and balanced way.
Of course.
So for those who have never listened to us before, James and I make up the Retrospectives podcast. What we do each and every episode is that we play a classic or cult classic game of the past with the intention of judging it from a modern perspective. We're not here to understand and evaluate the game in the context in which it was produced. And we're not here to reminisce nostalgically on our experiences playing this game when we were younger or at that precious time of our lives. We are simply here to evaluate it from a modern perspective and critique it from a modern perspective. In many ways, this is a very harsh standard of criticism because we're not allowing these games to catch up to the massive technological and design innovations that have come over the years. But one thing that James and I have discovered doing this show over 117 episodes is that a lot of the time, the things that were done in the past are not better or worse than the things that are done today. They're just different. And sometimes we're very pleasantly surprised when they're even better than the approach that a lot of modern games do. So I'm excited to look at Final Fantasy VII, and I think it's particularly relevant in the wake of the remakes that were made, because I know that those remakes are very controversial in the ways in which they changed the game. And I'm even slightly intrigued about playing the new ones after finishing this game to see if the new ones are all they're cracked up to be, or if people value very different things in video games that you've played a little bit of the new ones, right, James?
I played the demo for the first one and stopped and was like, I really don't want to play these before I actually go back and finish the original, but that door is open to me now, and once we finished this and we had a few weeks extra, delay, I strongly considered starting to play it, but was like, it's too soon. Maybe in like a year or so, I'll pick it up and give it a go. I will definitely do it one day, but I think I want to kind of sit on my feelings for this game for a bit before I do that. But I am interested, to say the least.
That makes a lot of sense. You need it to settle in your mind a bit before. You can't, if you just rush from one to the other.
Immediately do it again, yeah.
So I think the place to start, James, is talk a little bit about how we played the game, because there's lots of different versions of Final Fantasy VII, from playing on phone to emulating it to playing on PC. And you and I played on different platforms, which did impact the experience in a meaningful way. So how did you play it, James?
So I feel a bit guilty for this. So I looked up, some reviews on how different versions held up. And from the consensus seemed to be that the Steam version was a totally solid way to play the game. So I recommended that Patrick play that version.
And this is after I'd played the first hour or so emulated. But it's like, I trust you, James.
Yeah, and then I was like, I'll play the Switch version because I hear it's also good and it's based off the Steam version. So I played the Switch for the entire game through on Switch. I agree that it holds up pretty well. They did a good job of porting it. However, the Switch comes with a bunch of quality of life features that the Steam version doesn't, which is where my regret comes into play. So the Switch has you can press the left thumbstick to speed up the game by 3 times, and it also has a button you can press to turn random encounters off, and it also has a button to press to turn God mode on. So during my playthrough, I very specifically never used the God mode button. I used the speed up button quite a bit. Even like a lot of times it was just a battle is starting and I want to speed through the intro to the bit where I can make a selection. Like even just doing that made like speeding through some of the slower paced combat a bit, much better. And then near the second half of the game, there was a lot of dungeony areas that had items in them that both Patrick and I identified that the encounter rate was so high, it was actively making us not explore. So in these sections, I started using the turn encounters off a bit, and then more and more. And I actually ended up quite under-leveled, so near the second half of the game, which made some of the boss fights much more challenging than they would have been normally, which actually made me enjoy the game more because I had to really use tactics to beat the bosses because I was under-leveled. So I actually think playing this version of the game has made me have a much higher opinion on it than if I had played on the version Patrick played it on. I think the speed up is just something that all these turn-based games should have as a default feature, and the skip battles thing. Yeah, I think the game would just be better if you got 30% less encounters and XP. It would be more challenging and less frustrating. So take my review with a grain of salt, knowing that I played the game this way.
Honestly, we'll be getting into that a lot more later when we dive into the gameplay, but James is 100% correct. Those options would have been a godsend on PC, and I would have embraced them very happily. But
sorry,
I'll forgive you just this once, James. I know you tried to have my best interests in mind, and I generally do prefer to play things on PC anyway. But those cheats that you use would have been pretty helpful for me, and I probably would have seized them honestly.
Yeah.
in a couple of locations. So very briefly, so what we're going to do in terms of spoilers is James and I are going to begin with a discussion on the broader world building and the presentation of this game. This will have non-specific, broad, spoiler-ish bits, but we will avoid major plot spoilers. This is to give people a introduction into the world of FF7 with if you don't want to know too much about the specifics, but there will be random bits here and there. So if you're diehard about spoilers, you should skip this until you've played the game. After that, we will dive into some more specific stuff, and we'll give another spoiler warning at that point in time. So I think very, very broadly, because I want to avoid spoilers, we should talk about the premise of Final Fantasy VII for those who have somehow never heard of this game before. It is a turn-based JRPG developed by Square in 1997. You play as Cloud and his friends as they battle an evil corporation called Shinra as eco-terrorists. Along the way, they discover a deeper conspiracy that may threaten the face of the very world. That's all I'm going to say for now. We'll get into much more specific plot details later.
So this was one of the things that you mentioned to me that kind of had you interested in this game, was this setup to the game where the main characters are eco-terrorists compared to, you know, when we did Luna and the main character is this boy who had a dream of going to explore the world. So this you resonate more with terrorists than teenage boys with a drive to explore.
So I think that the setup here is super interesting for a whole bunch of reasons. The first is that the setting is intrinsically just a lot rarer in fantasy than it usually is. This fusion of technology and magic is one that is quite cool, a lot more interesting than generic fantasy. The other thing is that it seemed to promise a story that had a lot more shades of grey and nuance than a typical JRPG or typical generic fantasy setting, because you are set up as being fanatics or terrorists attempting to, doing extreme collateral damage to the state in order to achieve a goal. And from the description of this, it sounded like a more challenging story than I really expected from Final Fantasy VII. There's also the fact that this setting is kind of like deeply bound to industrialization. And I think industrialization as a fantasy setting is absolutely fascinating, because we live in a world where we live in incredible living conditions, and it's all thanks to industrialization. But industrialization also ruined the lives of millions of people. I mean, that whole thing where people were moving from smaller towns to factories, living conditions they were in, the damage to the environment, all of these things are controversial and interesting and worthy of discussion. So what I was thinking going into this game is like, holy shit, I could be playing a Final Fantasy game that actually has a deep and mature story. Did you find that was the case when you played this video game, James?
I found the game's narrative to be fairly patchworky in terms of tone. I pretty much expect and welcome this in terms of most like Japanese writing. I quite liked stories that have like moments of punchy, maturity and complete stupidity in between them, and that's kind of never bothered to me. For me personally, I don't think like where I am now, 7 really hit on the bits where it was trying to be more mature. And the comedy elements also kind of fell a bit flat to me. I do think that there are parts of the narrative that I found quite compelling, but this initial setup of the eco-terrorism, I think, is the way they portrayed it is so black and white that it kind of loses any possible nuance or intrigue that could have come from this kind of plot. It's just the person in charge of the city is super mega evil, and you are not, and that's kind of like, that's how it is.
Yeah, and I think that the thing for me that was so disappointing is that the game had multiple opportunities to present a more nuanced take, and it always defaulted to this simple, what ended up being good versus evil storyline. So I found that very disappointing. Ultimately, I don't blame the game hardcore for that. I mean, at the end of the day, it is still a more interesting premise than a lot of generic fantasy. But for me, it ended up being stronger in terms of world building and the joy of exploring the world than in terms of the strength of the, I guess, ideological perspectives of the factions inside it.
Yeah, in terms of the like very specific writing and the dialogue, I think this game kind of suffers a lot when you compare it to more modern takes in the genre. I think some of the writing is often quite flat, but I do think that the game does a fairly good job of having these consistent themes that even if the characters aren't expressing them very well, you can kind of feel like, to me, a lot of the villains in this game are very like cartoonishly evil. But I think it's kind of like that's kind of like the first level of looking at the narrative. To me, what's lying underneath is the idea that I think it's basically human weakness that kind of drives the events of the story, like things like the base, greed and that kind of thing. And basically everything that happens from the story happens because this normal person with this very normal human emotion, like kind of dug into it too much and then kind of had this cascading effect on a lot of people's lives. Specifically, the scientist Hojo, I think, is basically the source of all the problems in the entire game, based on his decision making on the past and kind of the greed and arrogance that came from it. And I think a lot of the characters were affected by that over the course of the story. Now, while I think a lot of the moments with these characters in the scenes aren't great, I think that, when you kind of step back and view the events as a whole, I don't really have too many problems with that, I guess. It's all like, I think the characters and the way the dialogue was presented kind of failed to deliver these for me, I guess, most of the time.
So I want to get into this, dive into this a bit deeper, because I think this is actually one of the most interesting things about Final Fantasy VII compared to a lot of other stories I've encountered in media in general. And the game I immediately thought of in contrast to this, not too long ago, we did Metal Gear Solid 1 and 2. Metal Gear Solid 1 and 2 are very thick and heavy with dialogue. In fact, sometimes you have these 6 to 7 minute scenes where characters are just speaking back and forth with one another. Final Fantasy VII is the opposite. Final Fantasy VII is filled with gaps. It's filled with implications. Almost all the characters are drastically underwritten. But James, I actually really, really like this. And I don't know if it's because I'm more like, I have a very active imagination and I like connecting the dots and imagining these things about these characters. But I also found Hojo to be a very compelling character, not because of what we necessarily saw of him in his interactions, but by piecing together the broader world building with the things he did, and I guess the tragedy of his character. And it's all like only really implied. And I think this is a common thread for a lot of the characterization in these games. It has flow-on effects for the pacing as well, which I'll get into later. But when I conceive of Final Fantasy VII in my head, it feels like a stronger world and story than it ever really felt like in any particular moment playing the game.
Yeah, I agree. Basically, all of the characters, I think when they're talking is the weakest parts of the game. I think all of the dialogue is not very well handled. I think when you try to construct the entire puzzle in your mind, it's very enjoyable. Part of the reason is that the visual design and storytelling in this game is as strong as it is. I think one of the reasons that I, as a kid, was obsessed with this game, even though I had never been able to play it or find a copy of it in the store, was that some of the visual design that you saw online and in pictures was just so striking. Like, I have half of the images and cutscenes in this game I'd seen dozens of times online previous. Those images of Genova early on, of, Sephiroth against the fire, looks really cool, like Midgar from the bird's eye view, especially later on when there's the huge cannon. It just looks sick.
I have read online that there are people who don't like the graphics of this game, and all I can think is that those people are fucking insane. This game is gorgeous. Like, yes, the character models can be a little bit goofy, but the But the aesthetic presentation of this game is unreal. Every
Yeah.
time you move to a new scene and you get to see that hand painted canvas, which is the background that you're traversing across, they're almost all incredible, consistently incredible and enjoyable to experience. I think this game looks beautiful from an aesthetic point of view, and I think that it brings to life the world building of the game really well.
I think that there's a lot of elements of the graphics themselves that have aged, but I agree with you in that, yeah, the visual design is so strong that it shines through that. Like, although to be fair, I think the backgrounds do still hold up and look incredible.
They do.
Specifically, the models I think are what look a bit dated, but
Yeah.
even like in battle, they still look pretty good. It's just mostly the overworld. I think fails to sell the characters as much as they could.
Yeah, and I do think there's something to be said. In this game, you fight a lot of monstrosities, monsters variants, and while I think that those 3D models do look kind of goofy when
the
it's
low
meant to be a
detail
human,
kind of adds to it when it's a monster.
exactly, yeah. And there are a lot of those. But yes, when you're fighting enemy humans or like enemy tanks and stuff, it doesn't look great, the 3D models, but fighting those monsters and stuff in the same way that Quake's monsters are horrifying, I feel that Final Fantasy VII's monsters are quite horrifying. So
when characters are talking in cutscenes, that's when I'm like, ugh, a little bit.
yeah, it's kind of like they only have a preset number of animations that exist, so they need to try and maximize those animations in different combinations. I think that they push it as far as they reasonably can, but it can't help but stand out.
Yeah, there's some bits where I think a lot of the emotional tension is lost a bit because of the models and the flat writing. I think the localization feels very literal to me, like they didn't add too much color to the characters to bring it up for the West. It feels a bit. Some of the characters sometimes feel a bit cardboardy when they're talking, which with the lower emotive models doesn't help sell them to me. I think out of the main cast, only really Eris got through to me and like me really liking her personality. Like Tifa, I found super boring. Barrett was pretty one note, and then the rest of the cast, I don't really have much of an opinion on, other than Vincent looks cool.
Yeah, so this is one of those areas where basically, yes, when the characters are speaking, they feel one note, but understanding what motivates those characters, it's what's interesting.
Is more
about
enjoyable.
them. Yeah, because I also found Tifa very boring at the beginning of the game, but by the end of the game, when I better understood the some of the plot reveals, it recontextualized a lot of what the ways in which Tifa was acting. And the same thing happened with Barrett too in a different way. I'm just being careful to avoid spoilers here until later. We will get into it, but I think that these characters are once again interesting because of your imagination and connecting the dots as to what motivates them. As in some ways, they're more enjoyable in retrospect, is maybe a good way to put it.
Yeah, I think that's 100%. These characters are really fun to think about.
Yeah.
The actual act of playing with them isn't as high as like daydreaming about all the plot threads and how they link together.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I haven't. It's a bit like Pathologic, but in the way that it kind of settles in your mind, and you really enjoy that feeling of piecing it together. But Pathologic obviously is also good up front, so it works on multiple levels.
Yeah, I've always been very receptive to this kind of storytelling, where most of the story takes place when you're not playing the game.
James, I want to move to another iteration of why I think the presentation is the best aspect of this game. And these are the scenes in my mind that loom large in my mind when I think about this game. And I don't know what you'd call these exactly. I think of them as
like
sequences.
Set piece moments.
Yeah, set pieces, sequences. And I think for now we should just talk about the initial bombing as a really good example of this. And there are a lot of scenes that are interesting in this way, but I think that the first 30 minutes of this game are absolutely phenomenal from start to finish in every way. What the game does is it kind of fuses cutscenes with in-game cutscenes, with you moving across the environment and exploring it, with even the random battles, and it combines them into a continuous sequence that is incredibly well paced and engaging, with that soundtrack slamming along in the background consistently throughout the sequence.
This game has one of the best soundtracks like ever, right? It's not
You
just
know,
me.
if you were to ask me that, when I was a third of the way through the game, I wouldn't have said so. But holy shit, James, I listened to pretty much the entire soundtrack and
Yeah,
I recognized and enjoyed 95% of them. Like
yeah.
100%, they all spoke to me and I could think to the exact time in the game when they were playing. Um, and the soundtrack is the thing that underpins these set piece scenes that play out. It does so many things that are, I don't know if they're unique, but for some reason it's executed so well here. And the main thing I can think of that makes them work so well is the fact that this game has fixed camera angles.
Yeah.
So it's always able to frame the scene in exactly the way it wants you to see it, as opposed to a 3D game where there's I guess you give the player more control to look at what they want.
Even in battle, I would say, did you not get that feeling that because it's got a very dynamic camera that sweeps across the battlefield and zooms in on things. To me, it felt like the camera, the way it was moving, was kind of in tune with a lot of the music. Like it had this rhythm to it that felt really cool in comparison, because it's got some really peppy battle tracks, right?
It's everything. It's the sound effects as well. Like when your gauge fills up, the noise when you're pressing the menus, like it all syncs together incredibly well. And I have some very strong opinions on the random battles in the dungeons, and mainly the dungeons, but the overworld as well. But in these set piece kind of sequences, they are an important part of the experience. Like you'll go through 6 or 7 of them and they will be roughly paced out over the course of the set piece, and they will usually make sense in the context of the set piece, and it all just flows so nicely how you move between the different bits of the entire sequence. It's really good. That the initial bomb scene is fantastic, and there's at least 5 other scenes which are just as good as this one. Like very early on, what happens is you're going across this plane and then you get inside an elevator. It cuts to a side-on view of the elevator. Then the elevator kind of jerks up a bit and goes down the floor, and the camera pans down to meet it. And it's very engaging and enjoyable.
The direction's really good.
Yeah,
it's almost shot like a movie in some ways. And the pacing, I think, like when it's firing on all cylinders, is one of this game's strongest points, specifically during Midgar and near the end of the game. I think the pacing is like almost perfect. There's basically no wasted space or unnecessary battles in the early game. It's awesome. Like everything feels pretty meaningful. This game, if I had to describe it, it feels like the developers were hell-bent on taking Rule of Cool to its extreme, right? And just doing everything that they could to make, the characters and what you're doing and the soundtrack and the action shots and the direction just to be as cool and sick as possible, right?
The other scene that comes to mind for me is the one where you are a prisoner and you need to escape it and there's like the prison is a giant artillery platform. I love that sequence from start to finish. Like it's so perfect. Just love it to pieces. But that's not the only one. There are also some more emotional scenes which I think are executed very well. It's not purely action-driven scenes, but yeah, I find this game gripped me. Like it was
descending down into the City of the Ancients. Like the visual presentation of that place is like nuts,
and the soundtrack, of course. Like
incredible.
Yeah, it's so good at creating a sense of place, and that's why I wanted to start with the world building, because I think that basically all of these separate elements, the world building, this kind of like underwritten dialogue, which allows for rapid pacing, the beautiful aesthetic that's created, and of course the unbelievably soundtrack, they all come together to create this really compelling set pieces and scenic moments that I just love. Like I really enjoyed them.
Probably, yeah. Visually, my favorite part of the entire game was that bit during the flashback right at the end where they enter the room where Genova's chilling. And how the room is just covered with these huge thick wires, and that huge figurehead in front of the container that he just rips off. Like that whole room, just like it's so visually striking, awesome.
And because I feel like I'm being too positive, note that I'm not talking about the game as a cohesive whole in terms of its storytelling. We'll get into
No,
that later, but I really want to highlight these more individual moments because when this game is firing on all cylinders, it's incredible, and I don't want to take that away from my broader criticisms that I'll get into.
yeah, and I kind of want to do talk about that because to me, out of every game that I've ever played, this game feels the most like a patchwork quilt. It just feels like it's extremely inconsistent, like we've been talking about. When it is, running well, it's amazing. And then there are some times where the game, it's like I felt like the budget all evaporated, but then it'll come back and be awesome again, and then it'll go back to being like really weird and kind of boring.
For me, it's like
Um,
they made the side quest part of the main quest.
yeah, and the side quests very questionable in terms of quality
And,
and like.
and when the main stuff is paced so well, it's all the more obvious when things drop that pacing.
So Midgar was like what, like 8 hours long? Would you say
Even
maybe
shorter, I think. I'd say like
like six?
six-ish
Yeah,
hours long.
I would basically say that entire sequence is like perfect in terms of pacing.
Yes, I
And
completely agree. I was actually I remember being shocked at how fast we moved on to the second mission. I was like, "What? This game is a good video game that's not wasting my time with irrelevant bullshit." I was amazed at how dedicated it was to keeping the story moving in a meaningful way, and it's amazing that I feel that way because I feel like this is a rare thing for JRPGs. Maybe at least based on my experience with Luna, there was just so much dicking around in that game.
it's not my preference actually. I actually really enjoy really slow starts to these games. I think it makes the rest of the game feel more meaningful. Like, um, I think like you've played the start of Kingdom Hearts 1, right?
Yeah,
I love that section on the island. It's super relaxing. You can do it as slow or as fast as you want. There's lots of shit to fuck around with. The slow pace at the start into a fast pace is my preference, but I here it didn't bother me. I really enjoyed it.
yeah. I kind of like fast pace into slow pace. Revealing characters and world through the opening. I mean, I know it's a obvious cliche, but with Batman, the what's it
Oh, I
called?
actually
Batman: The
hate
Dark
that.
Knight.
Now that you've pointed that out, I sorry, not Batman, but I hate when the start of a game it does this thing where it rapid fire shows you everything because they're like afraid you'll get bored or something.
No,
Like,
that's a.
uh,
I mean, I don't think that's a way to look at it. When you know the opening scene to Batman: The Dark Knight with the assault on the bank.
yes,
Yeah,
that was good. Yeah,
that's what this felt like to me. It gave you a insight into the world, but not in a way that was exposition heavy. It
okay,
was
sure.
revealing the world through the lens of this group going about that mission, and
It's
I really
best when
like that.
it's best when they show you stuff without telling you what it is, like to create
Yes,
a bit of intrigue.
yeah.
When it's like, I don't know, my least favorite way for a game to begin is when you play an action game and you have all your abilities and you get to wreck things for like a minute and then you lose them all. I hate that shit. It's like
Classic thing. Most people love that. I mean,
the starter
Castlevania Symphony
prototype,
of the
I
Night
think,
does it
starts
as
like
well.
that.
Super
Yeah,
Metroid starts like that. The Lord of the
hate
Rings
it.
games start like that. It's very common. I mean, I guess I don't really care about it too much from a gameplay point of view, but from a story point of view, I do like when you're given a slice of the world through an action scene, and then it kind of slows down a bit and you get some characterization afterwards. And I think Final Fantasy VII nails that.
And then you leave Midgar and oh boy, lots of questionable things rapid fire. I think this bit where you leave Midgar and then probably all the way up until you get back to Cloud's hometown is to me the weakest part of the game by like a lot.
I think there's kind of like two middle bits in this game, and then the bit directly in the middle of the game is quite good.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree.
So there's kind of like these big lulls, I guess, at the 1/3 and 2/3 mark.
And it's like
because
the
it's not.
start, the middle, and the end are like pretty great consistently. I
Yes,
found,
yeah.
yeah. Um,
James, listen, I want to fit as many music breaks in as possible. So
Great, let's
let's
do it.
let's have a music break now, and when we return, we will go more into I think it's worth doing a deep dive breakdown specifically of Midgard, because that's a really good example of everything we mostly enjoy about the game.
I want to talk about the gameplay specifics too, because we haven't even touched the battles yet.
Yeah, we'll get more into the gameplay specifics when we talk about Midgard. Then we can kind of open the floor and go a bit wild. But let's have a music break and then we can dive in deeper. James, what is the first song you wish to select? And it's not going to be an easy thing to.
Yep, so I'm going to pick one of the battle themes right up. This is my favorite battle theme in the game. I think it'll be for most people. It's Those Who Fight Further, which I think everybody kind of associates as being the main theme of the game almost. It's just like a fantastic, really high-octane battle track that just sells the mood of the game. It plays so much during the opening sequence, and I never, ever, ever got sick of it, and I think it's probably the same for most of the people who played the game. So this is Those Who Fight Further. Alrighty, Patrick, is that not the best battle theme of all time?
Man, I don't know if I would go that far. I think that it's funny. I wouldn't put a lot of these tracks as my favorite of all time as individual tracks, but as a whole, it's definitely one of the strongest soundtracks I've ever listened to. Like, I'd put it in my top 5 OSTs ever. And I never thought I would be saying that about a Final Fantasy soundtrack, honest to God. These things normally don't do much for me, as you well know.
Well, they nauseate you even.
Well, yeah, I find them kind of like a bit cloy. But this one, the balance of the more, I guess, exciting tracks were with even the more chill tracks are really good. I like most of the songs on this. I even like the more gentle themes, and in fact, some of the gentle themes are amongst my favorite. It even does like weird, eerie, off-putting tracks really well.
Oh, I think it does ominous foreboding really well.
Ominous foreboding,
in fact,
uncomfortable.
Those are the best parts of the game, because it's usually when the characters aren't talking.
Yeah, I don't know, like there's so much. I like all of the flavors of this soundtrack to pieces. So is it the best battle theme ever? Maybe not, but it's extremely good, and I don't have much bad to pay about this soundtrack. The only thing that I would say, and this feels like a very unfair complaint given that the soundtrack has like 80 songs on it, the songs early on in the game were felt so iconic to specific areas that occasionally some of them repeat when you visit other towns. I was like, I don't like that. That theme is so closely tied to this area.
It was funny. There was actually this moment early on when you're first on the train, and whatever music was playing there I hated at the time and was like, this soundtrack's gonna be hit or miss, and
Mm.
then every other song was a banger. So I don't know, maybe it was just that one I really didn't like.
If for me, it was like when you're in the area near the is it the Golden Bee or whatever
The
the
Gold Saucer? Oh,
no no
the
no
Golden Bee Inn, the Honey
yeah
Bee Inn.
the area with the Golden Bee, and it's got like this bassy sort of twangy soundtrack. And I
Mm.
was like, yeah, that the the slums kind of like dirty red light
Red Light
district area.
District.
And
Yeah.
then it replays at another point in the game. I'm like, you can't be doing that.
Ugh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I looked at how many songs were on the soundtrack, and I'm like, nah, I don't know if I can criticize a 90-song soundtrack for not
For
having
not
enough
having
original
enough.
music. But that's the only thing I have to say negative about it, which is crazy.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, can we talk a bit about battles now? I don't know if it's too early to talk about this, but I have so many notes about materia specifically, that could go on
Let's
for hours,
listen.
I feel like.
There's a lot of different things feeding into this, so let's just go. And over the course of our discussion, I think we'll be able to paint a picture of what battling is like.
All right, so to start with the basics, every character in the game does not have their own unique spells and attacks that are unique to them. So every character has a unique weapon. So Barrett starts with, his one of his arms is a gun, and Cloud has his huge sword, and they can only ever have those weapons. So Cloud can only ever equip swords, Barrett can only ever equip guns, um, Tifa can only ever equip gloves, etc. And they each have a limit break.
Yeah, the limit break triggers when they take a certain amount of damage. When they've taken that damage, their basic attack turns into a special attack that gets consumed when they attack. And generally, it just does a shitload of damage, but there are different variations, whether it's giving it an AoE or giving it a cool and useful side effect in addition to doing a lot of damage.
Yeah, notably, Barrett has one that drains mana that I had to use to beat a boss, so it couldn't use its one-hit attack on me. That was pretty funny. But yeah, every character, the thing that makes them unique is this overdrive attack, which is, they've got a lot of them actually. Each character has like, I'm going to say like 4 to 12 maybe,
12.
different ones. Yeah, because there's like the 4 levels, and each level has 3, right?
Oh, right.
So there's like 12 or something, but at any given time you can pick one of 3, right?
Yeah.
And then outside of that, you can, use items as you normally would in battle. And then one of the things that's kind of I never liked about some of these later Final Fantasy games, or in this era, is that the game actually uses active time battle. So it's like semi-real time, semi-turn based. So under each character's name, there is a bar that's constantly filling up, and once it gets to the end, they can take their turn. Multiple characters can have their bars filled at the same time, and then you can rapidly take their turns one after the other. And then generally the bars will not go up during the middle of cutscene attacks, that kind of thing.
Can we talk about this, please? I feel like we need to talk about this.
Yes, we do. I don't know about you, but I've always hated this.
It fucking sucks. Oh my god. It is terrible in so many ways. I really, really hate this system. So, firstly, turn-based is better, but the other thing that came to mind when I was playing this game is that, okay, I get it. You want to put me under time pressure so I don't have infinite time to make a decision. Why don't you just use a rope system? Give me 10 seconds to make the decision when or 5 seconds to make a decision when it swaps to me, instead of punishing me for poor menu usage. Because ultimately what this did was, like, I knew what I wanted to do at the beginning of each turn. The game isn't so complicated that you're trying to weigh 5 different options and which is going to be the best. What you get punished for is having to scroll down a menu to the bottom to select an attack, which is not an enjoyable thing. It's not an enjoyable test of skill to judge how quickly you navigate a menu. So,
and it's kind of compounded by the fact that this game has, and I'm easily going on record saying this, it has the worst menus in a turn-based game that I've ever played. Maybe the older games have worse menus, but it's...
I think Vagrant Story is worse than buttons. But
Is it actually?
yeah, I
Because
think so.
the thing that really upsets me is that you have a list of abilities in your menu, and they are not next to each other. If you have a bunch of summons, they like the list has set positions where each
Yeah.
ability can appear. So you can have lightning, which or thunder attack, which is the first, and then you have to scroll down like 20 blank entries to find like the other thing.
I thought my game was
Especially
bugged.
in
I was like, where I equipped the thing. Where is this attack?
no, you just have to scroll down through blank space until you get to it because they're not ordered. So this compounds the issue where you're under time pressure to select the move, but the move is like so far down.
Oh, and
And
God
it gets
forbid you want
even
to select
worse
an
with
item,
items.
right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, the item organization is horrific. There's items you can't actually use in battle, but they'll appear in the
Yep.
item option. So you have to scroll like it's like I want to use a potion. You have to scroll down through like 30 irrelevant things and you can't sort like mid battle. Oh, it's awful. Like it shows you all the weapons for the other characters. Like you can't equip these weapons, you can't do anything with them, but they take time to scroll past. Like
Yeah,
multiple times I got hit because I had to do that bullshit.
it's worth noting that there are multiple submenus as well. You have your enemy skill submenu. You've got your summon submenu.
There could have
you've got
been
your
different item
submenu.
submenus. There could have been consumables and throwing weapons or like equipment. They
Yeah.
could have split the items up, but they didn't.
There
It's
are
just
so
a
many-
giant list of like 200
Basically,
things.
there's like so many things they could have done and they didn't. Like they didn't give a shit. They're like,
I guarantee there is a mod for this on Steam. I guarantee, and I absolutely say that anyone who plays this game should find that hypothetical mod and install it, because this is like there's no like argument here. It's just bad, right?
The thing is, it affects outside of combat as well. But when you're outside of combat, there's no time pressure. So this is specifically an issue with the combat because, like I said, the thing that the concept is fine, right? It's like we don't want a turn-based system. We want it to be a bit more exciting. We want to put some pressure on the player. Right. Give me a timer. Give me 5 seconds to make a decision. If I haven't made the decision in 5 seconds, it auto uses whatever my cursor is left on. That will make me have to rapidly make a decision.
And I'm fine with that
having the
too.
time
Yeah.
tick down endlessly while I try and find the thing is just frustrating because the longer it takes to make a decision, the more you get punished. You should have some kind of free period of time where you don't get punished, but you get punished if you take longer than a microsecond to make a decision in this game.
Yeah, I really don't mind the idea of getting punished for time. It's very inconsistent. Like sometimes the timer ticks down and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes during bosses' attacks that take a long time, it won't tick down. Sometimes it randomly will and you just get fucked.
Sometimes it felt like the boss took 2 or 3 turns in a row. I thought I might have been misunderstanding a system, like maybe a retaliation attack had stacked up, but I wasn't quite sure. Generally, when I had haste on, it felt pretty manageable. My other frustration is during summons, it locks your menus. You're not able to queue up an attack.
Yeah.
They really wanted you to watch the summons to the point where they're like, nope, you don't get to queue an attack. It's like, fuck you.
Yeah, I hate ATB, I always have. I think basic turn-based is always better. Basic turn-based with a timer sounds great to me. I'm happy with that. But, the game, it kind of does have a turn-based mode in the options. You can set it to that. Honestly, I think when I was playing it, I was like, that seems like cheating almost, but the game's so easy that like you're better off just putting it on turn-based and playing it that way, I think.
I wonder if it's slower though. Like that would be my other frustration if it takes longer.
It might do actually, yeah.
If it's just faster to suffer, then I'd rather just suffer. It's just frustrating from an optimization point of view because I really felt the pressure to like navigate my menus at light speed.
And I was fine with that pressure. It's just the way it's kind of icky, I think.
Anyway, I'm sorry to interrupt you, James, but I just needed to get that out front and center.
Yeah, so after that, after items, the other way that your characters use their moves is through the materia system, which I think is the most notable part of FF7's battle system. To me, it's like the defining characteristic of the gameplay, is that characters have two equipment slots. They have a weapon and they have armor. And each of these has a number of sockets in them that sometimes are linked together, sometimes aren't. And you can put materia orbs in them, which are your attacks and abilities. So if you'll have a thing called fire materia, and if you equip it in that sword, that character can use the fire spell. On top of this, there is also support materia such as all. So if I equip fire materia and link that to all materia, then the fire attack will hit every enemy on screen at once. And there's other things like this one will do more damage but use more mana. There's all kinds of ways you can modify, the spells that you have.
Also worth noting, each materia, for the most part, has multiple spells associated with it. So the materia are, what is it? It's like a support.
Fire will have.
Well, fire has different levels,
fire 3, right?
But also the support spells will have spells which have completely different effects. So you'll have something that the time one is a really good example. The time one will have haste, slow, and stop. And as the materia gains experience, it will unlock additional levels of spells. So there are ones that are more straightforward. They'll just give you more powerful versions of a previous effect. But with a lot of the support ones, it literally opens up new spells to you to access.
Yeah, and you can freely take these off characters and put them on other characters, and the materia themselves hold their experience. So, if you can put high-level materia on your low-level characters, and it'll be the same as if the higher-level character used the spell, only different from whatever their stat difference is. So it's almost like an infinite respec system and a customization option. I felt that this system was really cool in terms of the game constantly gives you new ones to play with. Like, it's just
Endlessly.
an endless treadmill. Yeah, it's just new one after new one after new one.
You cannot complain that this game does not have the novelty of giving you new types of ways to interact with enemies. I don't know how many there are, but there must be like 100 in the game. Like something crazy.
And then when you factor in like the combinations you can do, like some of the combinations, like the difference between equipping all to fire, thunder, and frost, that's not that different. But there are some that feel substantially different when you equip them together. So there is quite a bit of variety here. One thing that I felt that this system kind of negatively made me feel about the game was that all of the characters can have any materia at any time. So you could have your magic. So some of the materia, when you equip them, also do stat changes. Like most of the summons reduce max health but give you more magic damage. So what I was doing was stacking all of those ones on one character to make them like a magic DPS or that kind of thing. But one of the things that I felt that this materia system does is that it means that the characters don't have too much mechanical identity. And I think for some people, that's actually a huge positive because they can play with, the cast has like 9 or 10 characters. Yeah, 8 or something. You can pick any 3 characters that you want, and you can pick the 3 that you like, and you can put all your cool materia on them, and they can be your party because the characters themselves don't really have too much that distinguishes them mechanically other than their ultimate and their limit break. And their limit break doesn't really impact like the materia that you equip on them to some degree. It's just like a special attack that's completely unrelated to the spells that they have. So in some sense, I think it succeeds in that way. You can pick your favorites, but on the other sense, I felt like, to me, at least personally, the lack of mechanical identity is a bit boring. I kind of like theory crafting, what materia to put on what characters. And this game doesn't have that at all, in my opinion.
At the core of it, while you can choose which ones you use, and it's kind of cool being able to choose what combination of things to do, this game doesn't really have builds. And that's, from an RPG perspective, is kind of disappointing.
It
I
seems
think
like a failure to me, although
I think
I do.
like Diablo 1, which one of the things that we talked about a lot with that game was how simple it was, how it didn't have a lot of the, I guess, the RPG systems that you might expect from an RPG. That game has
Is
more in
more
terms
than
of
that.
building a character in a particular way than Final Fantasy VII does. The mechanics in this game are more complicated than Diablo 1 for sure,
Yep.
but at the end of the day, it's a collection of materia that's spread out between your characters. The materia is the thing that matters, not the characters, and that does a bit to take away from the identity of the characters.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons I've never liked respecs too much in RPGs, specifically when you have a
Interesting.
blank slate character as your main character, because to me, when I go through the game, I'm building an identity for my character through the choices I make with the skill point allocation and the armor I equip with them. And, 60 hours in, my character, he's this guy who throws fireballs. That's who I think of him as. If I then just respec him into a guy with a great sword, like I've kind of like destroyed the identity of the character, because narratively my character doesn't have any story associated with them. They only have mechanics. So in those kinds of games, it always feels like I'm killing my character when I respec them.
It's kind of interesting. So I messed around a lot with the materia as I moved towards the mid game, and I
I
kind
had
of
I had
conceived.
every character do a different thing in this
Well,
game. Like Cloud was a tank, a mage, and a DPS, like
well,
multiple times.
here's the thing. I think that you create character classes based on combinations of materia, and then
Yeah.
you kind of assign that class to a character. It's like, so I had like a support mage that would cast haste, had heals, and had regens. They had phoenix on them, etc. And
Mm.
then that was like a character archetype that I designed with the available materia. But it didn't matter who I put it on. Like I would shift that set of material around. So I did do character building, but it was kind of like an abstract concept that I would just throw on a character as opposed to saying X character is X class.
And I actually I struggle with calling this a criticism, even because it, like as I said, like I think a lot of people. I've seen lots of comments where people hate when games pigeonhole you into doing certain things with certain characters. So I think for some people, this approach is going to be a positive.
You can do both
Um,
though. Like you can have a
yeah,
system that allows for characters to express their classes in multiple different ways, right? It doesn't need to
yeah,
be one or the other. And yes, once again, we are criticizing from a modern perspective, but this is something that modern RPGs, and I'm assuming modern JRPGs, do significantly better than what we've got here in Final Fantasy VII.
yeah. I actually, so my favorite game, right, is FF10.
Hmm.
And 10, everyone shares, because you've seen the sphere grid, it's gigantic. Everyone shares the same grid, so technically every character can do anything. However, they have different starting positions, and you have limited ways of moving them drastically across the grid. So once you kind of lock someone into a path, they kind of keep that identity until you get to the very end of the grinding when everyone has everything. But like for the majority of the story, your characters do have identity, but you can do whatever you want with every character. But it kind of, you get locked in as the game goes on, right? Um,
Yeah. So, like, I think we're pretty clear on in terms of identity and how Final Fantasy VII kind of misses the mark in this way. What were your thoughts on the materia as a gameplay system, how it actually played out in the battles, how it played out in terms of your decision making when building characters? Do you think that this offers a meaningful RPG customization experience?
Yeah, so I'm actually split on this. So I think at the start of the game it does, and I think the longer the game goes on, the less it starts to matter until you get to the very end where it starts mattering again. My favorite moment of the entire game was that first time you get the all materia. the very first support materia in the game, and you have one of them. And it's like it to me, it felt super impactful because I had three characters who were doing different things. Like I had someone doing damage, someone healing, someone blocking, that kind of thing. And I was like, I have this choice now. I can put this thing on the healer, and I can now have an AoE heal, which is super convenient. Or I can put it on Cloud and put it on the Lightning, and he can, lightning storm the entire field. And both of those decisions I tried both of them, and they both felt good to me, and they were fun. And and then further on in the game, there were some bosses that felt like, because once I was underleveled, I needed to start using specific materia to beat them. There was a couple of bosses that put reflect on themselves, and you had to dispel it, otherwise you'd one-hit your own party, or they put haste on themselves, or you needed to put haste on yourself, that kind of thing. I think that the game at certain points does a good job of leveraging the puzzle solving aspect that the materia provides, because one thing that the game can do is that it can present a boss that needs to be beaten in a certain way, and because the materia can be freely swapped in and out, like you are free to change up your strategy when fighting the boss. Now, for me, the problem was that the game is too easy, in that no matter what, like, there are objectively better combinations of materia for certain bosses, but it generally just didn't matter because I beat it first try regardless. So I think this system has the potential for really cool puzzle like boss gameplay and enemy encounter solving, but it doesn't really do that. What it does do is it lets you use your cool ability, it gives you fuckloads of cool abilities and lets you use those cool abilities however the hell you want, right?
Yeah, it leans into novelty rather than challenge.
Yeah.
So James, I haven't played an endless number of JRPGs, but one that I've played a lot of is Pokemon. I've played a lot of Pokemon, and I've even indulged in some Pokemon ROM hacks. And playing what this game reminded me a lot of was Pokemon. Pokemon has this thing going on where it's got all of these cool Pokemon you can find and use. But the gameplay of regular Pokemon sucks. Like, it's very boring and there's no real challenge. But you know what's fun about Pokemon? Finding cool new Pokemon, finding new moves to teach them, exploring the world. It's enjoyable on that level because you get all this cool customization and you're constantly given new options. Every time you go to a new area, you get cool new options, and you can be like, oh, do I want this in my party? What am I going to replace it with? Oh, it leveled up and learned a new move. Cool. Final Fantasy VII felt a lot like that for me, in that the joy of the experience wasn't in actually using them. It was in getting the new toys and getting to mess around with them. And long before you're even bored with it, you get the new toy. And, your materia levels up and you get the new spell. And then you get to combine it with something. I will say there was one exception to this. There was like a level up click moment for me that made me realize, I guess, the potential depth of this system, and that's using materia and items defensively. I don't know how much you utilize this, James, but there's a lot of items in the games and defensive materia combinations that give you immunities to damage types and status effects. And when used in correct combinations, you actually end up having some insanely good coverage against enemy attacks. So while I didn't get a lot from the offensive side of the strategy, I found that offensively it rarely really mattered what you did. I did find that by messing around with my materia and equipment defensively, I could actually basically win encounters off the back of that alone.
Yeah, it's when you start stacking buffs in the right order, and you keep regen up, and you keep haste up, and you keep shield up, all those kinds of things.
You die to an enemy and you realize it's using a particular status effect. You then equip that, and all of a sudden the battle feels completely different.
Yeah, there's a materia that it gives you an immunity to something.
Elemental,
depending,
you combine it with the summons,
Yeah, and then you put it on your armor, and then elemental either gives you immunity buff on your armor, or it makes your weapon do that damage type if you equip it in your weapon. Yeah. I didn't use that at all because you can randomly like come up to something that's immune and you just screw yourself. But it's always good defensively.
Yeah.
Um,
And then you'll
yeah,
have
this
like armor that absorbs or halves damage from 3 different effects. Then you'll put on a ring, which gives you immunity against a certain element. And then,
yeah.
yeah, when you stack these all up correctly, defensively, you can solve most problems. So I have to say, I just want to add that as a note that I quite enjoyed that aspect of the game. And that was how I was able to overcome, I guess, the most challenging area of the game by investing more time into the defensive options that were available to me. And definitely there were a couple of boss fights where I was getting my ass kicked, where using that allowed me to overcome.
Yeah, how did you feel about summons, by the way? I'm kind of interested to hear your opinion because these
Oh
have
my god.
very long animations, but are some of the coolest looking animations in the game. At least the first couple of times you use them.
See, it is funny because even now, all these years later, and even with the criticisms I've laid at the 3D models, I still think these summons look cool. Like they definitely look cool.
Do.
They're animated very well, and the increasingly ridiculous the dragon ones you get are just funny in how the animation and the attack gets.
It just gets more ridiculous. My favorite one was the one where he throws I think it's Odin. He throws the spear and it parts the clouds.
Yeah,
it's like when it did that, I was like, "Holy shit, that's cool!"
Yeah.
But
or
Remo
summons,
with the big lightning. Loved it.
So I guess there's 2 things I want to get into here. The first is that there are like I guess the in gameplay effect of the summons, and then 3 things. Okay, so firstly, summons are kind of stupid because they tend to be big, powerful AoE attacks, and I think that in the mid game they are just the best thing to do. When you get the higher level spells, they end up being less efficient time wise than just using a couple of lightning 3s or whatever. But when you haven't leveled up your materia much, every summon you find just does more damage than the last. So you just use you're heavily incentivized to use
the cool looking attack rather than spamming lightning over and over.
And then I think they also have a problem in the end game where you have multiple of them stacked up on different characters, and I basically won the endgame fights by just doing back-to-back summons in a lot of instances. It was just summon, because it was just the most effective way to do damage, which is very cinematic, but I mean, not very strategic.
Actually, what I was doing at the end of the game was that I had Vincent with he'd have 6 to 8 summons equipped, and then he'd have 3 HP ups equipped to offset the HP loss.
Nice.
So, and then he would just use lightning every turn and just crack for 7k, 8k.
With the lightning. Well, I spammed a lot of summons, particularly against the earlier Sephiroth fights.
Used a lot of
yeah. But okay, so that's the first issue, in that there's a heavy incentive to use them in the mid game because they're just the most powerful thing, and a lot of the time they'll just one shot the enemy encounter. The second problem is the amount of time it takes to.
This was the number. Okay, I was pretty hell bent on not using the Switch's quality of life features, like the speed up and stuff. The summons were what convinced me to use the speed up. I could not deal with it. They take so long. It's 30 seconds in animation. It's to be fair, they do wipe the whole battle. Imagine waiting 30 seconds for them to kill one of 3 guys.
The thing is, even when it's 30 seconds, the battle itself will still take a minute 30 seconds because of all of the bits and pieces that play around it. And that's just your generic trash battle. And that is painful. It's so painful. And this is where the issue gets kind of multiplied out of control. This game has dungeons which aren't big, long dungeons, but they're dungeons
the encounter
with incredibly high encounter rate.
High. It's 4 steps or something sometimes.
Yeah, and every single one of those fights is taking all this time to do it. On top of this, it gets multiplied even further. So I have praised the aesthetics of this game, particularly those beautiful hand-painted, hand-drawn backdrops. But they have a gameplay implication, don't they, James?
Yeah, it's not very easy to see where to go all the time. I
No,
think.
and it's intentional because it happens over and over again, James.
Just okay, sorry, I need to cut out here. One more thing that the Switch has is you can press a button and it will put a little red arrow over all the doors in the room. Which would have saved me a lot of time because there are some doors that like do not look like doors, right?
James, I looked up a YouTube playthrough multiple times, not for strategy advice, not
It's where
for
to go.
it's where to go and how to get there. So I think like an early game example of this is what happens in early on, is this bit where you're crossing a junkyard with a robot hand.
Yeah.
It probably
yeah.
took me 3 to 4 minutes to figure out how to get across this screen that probably takes 30 seconds to run across. And the thing is, the game does this over and over and over again. At Cosmic Canyon, there's a bit where you have all of these interwoven pathways that crisscross each other, and you can't see the whole screen either. So you have to kind of pick a path and hope you're going down the right way.
And when you're lost in this game, like you want to die because it's like, all right, that was the wrong path. I'll turn around, take 2 steps, random encounter that takes a minute and a half. Okay,
exactly. And
I'll go down this path. It wasn't that one either. And this, we kind of agreed. I think Cosmo Canyon was the point where both of us kind of noped out on the idea of looking for items, because one of the things we said the game does really well is that it gives you so many cool things to find, right? Like, I know that every single item I find in the game is going to be a cool attack that's going to be awesome. And even if I know that, I still don't want to go get them because I have to sit through so much boring time-wasting filler every time I, like, walk down the wrong path slightly because the encounter rate is so damn high.
The way I viewed it is that if I accidentally got those items, so be it. Like, I'm going to try and get out of here, but once I find the path to exit, I'm going to take it, which is crazy for me because I like exploring in games.
Me too.
The other one that really got me stuck was the one, I think it's City of the Ancients, where you have all of the vines and staircases and bits where you... Oh, yeah, the game also makes you go behind objects on this 2D canvas, and it's not clear when you can go behind something and when you can't. So when you get to one of these dungeons, it is a complete nightmare. Like, it made me want to stop playing the game. It was actually, I was loathing the feeling of having to go through one of these areas and spend 40 minutes or however long it was in this dungeon trying to figure out how to get through 2 screens. It was really, really bad. And it just stood in stark contrast to those beautifully paced set pieces where the combat, you might get into a combat encounter 6 or 7 times over the course of it.
Yeah. I think that the Switch version saves these sections by like a lot. Like, it actually lets you get through them without having to, like, because what I'd do near the end was I'd go through them, I'd try to look around. If I got lost, I'd turn encounters off, I'd find the door, I'd turn the encounters back on, do some battles like outside of the door, then go through the door. It's like, I'm happy to do that number of battles, but it's really annoying when you're trying to find the exit and you're getting interrupted by the battles. I was happy to do like 8 battles in a row when I knew where to go.
Yes.
It was when I'm lost and I'm frustrated and I'm trying to find the exit, and then the battle starts and it's just like rubbing salt in the wound. Like, you're already feeling bad because you don't know where to go.
I think the other thing that Final Fantasy VII does really well is the novelty of finding new enemies. This game has a stupendous number of unique enemies.
Yes.
It's actually really good. You get a little bit of upgraded enemy, of baseline enemy from earlier on, but it's actually really rare. When you go into a new area, there's usually at least 5 to 6 different enemy types, and they come in different combinations. I think that final dungeon has closer to 10 different enemies.
Yeah, they're like all completely different in that dungeon. It's crazy.
So you can think that the frustration is not due to these encounters being against the same 3 enemies in the same formation millions of times. It's more that the systems surrounding the combat and the things that are incentivizing you, particularly with the summons, makes a lot of the combat just really, really drag. And it's only when you get that really tough boss fight that things change a bit. So James, can I bring up a specific boss fight here, if that's okay?
Yeah, go for it.
So I didn't die once in this game until I got to a thing called the Demon Gate, which shows up in the Temple of the Ancients. Do you know the one? It's
I died to that once. Yep.
Yeah, that enemy caused me a lot of troubles. I think I was severely underleveled for the area. But you know what I also discovered, James? This game has a formation system. Did you know this?
You didn't know that until then. Wow.
No.
Okay.
I genuinely did not know. And this enemy has an attack that does double damage to people in the front row, and half damage to enemies in the back row. And I was like,
I think just in general, people take half damage in the back row.
oh, okay.
But, yeah,
Well,
okay. That to me, that's a very normal JRPG system. Like, it makes sense that like lots of games have that actually.
yeah, I think the thing that threw me off is like when they're standing on the battlefield, they don't really look like they're in a front row and a back row. Does that make sense? Even when some are in the front and some are in the back, they still kind of look like
The game doesn't tell you about it either. Maybe it does in like the manual or something, but definitely there's no gameplay.
Obviously, in Luna or whatever, there's obviously a front and a back. In your Etrian Odyssey games, there's a front and a back. But in this game, I just assumed there was a straight line. Even when you move them in formation on the screen, it shifts them like half a centimeter. Like it's really
not very noticeable.
It's quite subtle. Yeah, that ended up helping me win the battle as well as a lot of materia messing around.
Lots of the characters do less damage when in the back unless they have a gun or something. A ranged weapon, yeah.
But this Demon Gate, because I was underleveled, it was like one-shotting Tifa with this generic attack. And I was like, how is this even possible? Like, what is going on?
Just went from 0 to 100 real quick.
Yeah, so... But that was a boss fight where I even was very naughty and grinded a couple of levels because I couldn't figure out what was going on. But in the end, it was me doing some Googling and looking up. Someone mentioned the formation thing. And I was like, what the hell? And then I was able to secure the win.
The thing I had to grind against was the Genova just before the Eris cutscene.
Oh,
that
really?
Thing killed me a bunch of times. Yeah, it would one hit my whole party. With
the Ultima attack, right?
Yeah, it would just hit my whole party and they just die because I was super underleveled. And then I got past that, and then I was killing myself on it because it cast Reflect on itself. But one of the consequences of being underleveled is that your materia is also underleveled. So I didn't have Dispel yet because wasn't.
That's insane. You get that so early on as well.
Yeah, I didn't have.
You must not have had it
that
equipped.
much. Yeah.
So I had to grind I just had it equipped. I rarely used
that thing up. Yeah.
When I saw it, I was like, "This is going to come in handy." I just know it is.
And then once I had that, the boss was pretty straightforward. But that was like one boss where your materia choice actually mattered, and I wanted to see more of that in the game because I like it a lot. When it did matter.
Oh yeah, can I just complain about animations again? So not only do your animations take a long time, the enemies' animations do as well. I know I'm just sequencing back into complaining about this, but oh my god. There was one enemy quite early on, you found it in the mansion and it had two heads. And every time you did damage to it, it had like an 8-second reaction animation. And the thing has 1200 health. It took me like 7 minutes to kill it because every attack it paused and looked like a goofy idiot for 8 seconds.
Did you get Vincent?
Sorry, I didn't end up getting him. I forgot to. And I was like, I could get him, but I couldn't be bothered anymore. I was like, there's no point. Like, all of the party members are the same. What's the advantage of getting a new character?
Yeah, his limit break was different to everyone's. He transformed into a monster.
So he was like a Jekyll and Hyde kind of character.
Yeah, you lost control of him for the rest of the battle when he transformed, which was interesting. I built him like a magic user. I think I should have just gone full physical because one of his transformations did a magic blast, which did lots when I had him equipped with all the summon stuff. But then like a few of the other ones were just like all Unga Bunga. He leaps in and smashes. But it was cool though. It felt a bit different to the other characters. The other limit break I liked was Katsith's, like his roll the dice one, just because there was one boss fight where I randomly used it, and he just rolled all sixes, and I insta killed the boss. It was so funny. It's
Yeah,
like,
I was kind of boring with my characters. I mainly used Barrett, Cloud, Aerith, Tifa, and I ended up using Sid in the end game because I thought it
I
was
like
funny.
Sid.
I thought it was funny how he was a dickhead. It's just a funny character. We'll get more on that later. But his character is terrible. It's kind of funny. I
It's
don't
funny.
understand some of the moral dilemmas in this game, but
Yeah, I used the two unlockable characters, Yuffie and Vincent, and they were hitting pretty hard. They were fun too.
Hmm.
Did you do Wu Tai? I forget.
I
Did you?
didn't end up doing it. I was kind of like ready to finish the game. I'm not, so I'm sure those optional areas are good and enjoyable, but I was like, I'm ready to tap
Oh,
out
I
now.
did it. Yeah, I did it like halfway through the game. Like, I wasn't like near the end. I went and did it. I wandered there by like as soon as I got the airship. That was the first place I went to because I figured that was the next area. And oh boy, are you probably supposed to go back there later? Because
And you get locked in there, right?
yeah, you get locked in. Yuffie, yeah, she steals all your materia, so you have none. So you have to beat this boss with only attack and limit break. And I had to look up how to beat it because I could not beat it. And then someone was like, you have to use Barrett's mana drain thing to mana drain it immediately. So grind mobs until he has max meter and then start the battle with the mana drain so it can't one hit your party. It's like, nice.
Nice, good video game, good boss fight, mash auto attacks, nice.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of liked the idea of using the specific special to beat the boss, but could have done it a bit better.
So do you have any more on the combat, James? Because there's another area of gameplay that I want to touch on here, and that's the mini games, the many mini games. But we can get to that later.
Yeah, one thing, materia, I think that the rate at which you acquire support materia is too low at the beginning of the game and doesn't pick up until much later. I wanted to mess around with cool combinations, and you mostly just got attacks and summons for like the first half of the game, and you got like all and maybe like one or two other, supports, and then you get like 6 to 10 like rapid fire near the end of the game. I was like, where was this? I wanted to mess around with combinations.
I think the other thing is that a lot of the support materia, because the combat is easy and killing enemies is the best way to prevent damage from enemies, you are pushed away from using support materia in a lot of instances. Like you get the option to do powerful all enemy debuffs, and that generally ends up being less effective than just nuking the battlefield and killing everyone, because that will
Yeah.
lead to you taking less damage.
And
This was an issue with Luna as well, and I think it's actually probably an issue with a lot of JRPGs, because you're weirdly, like, the incentives are always to minimize damage taken, and so you want to, and dealing damage ends up being most effective. You have to do weird things to make debuffs and buffs more viable, more indirect ways of affecting the combat effective. And Final Fantasy VII does not do that. It ends up being a fairly simple combat system.
yeah, I think when turn-based like this works well, you kind of have these phases where you're like, okay, I do lots of damage now. Okay, I have to switch to being defensive. Okay, I have to deal with the weird mechanic.
The gold standard of this, as far as I'm concerned, is Slay the Spire. Like, when you play Slay the Spire, you are often given multiple different options, and attacking, defending, buffing, and debuffing are all valid and viable options in most combats. It's about using the right combination at the right time.
At the right time.
Yeah, and that does it with by attributing costs to cards. It does it by having enemies move through different phases. It makes the game a resource grind. Like, healing, you can't freely heal as easily as you can, so you have to fairly significantly shift your design principles to make a turn-based system engaging and interesting.
Yeah.
And Final Fantasy VII just doesn't do that in a meaningful way. So
Not for a lack of trying. Like they did try to
yeah,
make a cool system for sure.
that is true, and this is why I keep coming to Pokemon, because Pokemon's systems in a competitive setting in modern day are good.
Cool.
Like
Yeah.
they're extremely good and interesting, but and it's all based on those early day formula. But in the actual video game, they're just not used. Like there
Yeah.
wasn't an effort made.
All the
to
ingredients are here. They just didn't put
Yes,
them together properly.
exactly. That's a good way to put it. They just haven't carefully constructed it. And as you said before, in the game's defense, that's not what it's trying to do, and it does go a long way in terms of novelty to make up.
Yeah. So generally, I found the combat enjoyable enough most of the time, and then during the dungeons, I was personally really hating it at some points. Most of the boss fights, even if they were easy, they generally were visually cool and interesting enough that I enjoyed all of them for the most part. Some of them were challenging enough to be more enjoyable. It's just the random encounters in dungeons and the overworld specifically where I felt like every time it happened, I was rolling my eyes, kind of thing. So hit or miss here. I also want to mention, I think this game has really bad shops, which is a weirdly specific criticism in some ways, but to me, it's kind of inexcusable in this game, which has such a crazy variety of items that you leave Midgar and you find a new town, and I immediately rushed to the shop to find what cool materia they had, and they sold Thunder and Heal, like the things I already had. And then I got to the next town and it was the same shit. I was like, what the hell? I was expecting to, like, I've got 10,000 gold and I was expecting to be staring at this menu trying to work out which of these cool, awesome things that I can't afford all of to buy.
So
And
the game uses its shops as ways for you to catch up if you miss the power spikes you find in the world. So
yeah.
you will find, so the shops will always be behind the power curve of what you're finding, but the shops do get upgraded after you get the airship, I think. So you have access to
once you get
bunch
to
of
like
things.
Medeal and stuff, they do have new things, and it's like,
Yeah.
oh, finally, they're cool. I like finding the shops again. But yeah, at the start, every single one was me being extremely disappointed every single time. Like,
But in the game's defense, it does give you lots of shit in the overworld. So would you have preferred it's a bit more evenly split between the shops and the overworld?
yeah, I guess other games like I played Baldur's Gate 3 last year with friends. And every single time we found a new merchant, we were all fighting to look through the guy's wares to see what cool magic items he had, right? Like, so it's an expectation thing. Like, if I go to the shop and I'm super excited and then I'm disappointed, it feels super bad. Whereas I guess if I didn't have that expectation, it wouldn't have been a problem for me. But like, I had that expectation. Everywhere else was giving me cool stuff. Why can't the shops?
Yeah,
I mean,
I can definitely see where you're coming from. I definitely got a bit irritated early on about it, but as the game progressed, I was less irritated.
yeah, I agree. Yeah.
James, let's have another
Second music break. Yeah.
So I want to pick so for me, there's just so many good ones to pick from here. Like, I think my favorite is just literally the first song of the game, which is the one that plays during the Shinra bombing mission. And it goes, like, it's so good. I love it to pieces. But I'm going to go for a different one because James picked such an energetic first track. And the one I'm going to pick is Aerith's theme. I'm picking this one mainly because there's a specific moment in the game, and I think that the way that this theme is used is actually is really beautiful. And I really enjoyed this scene and the way it used the music to sell the emotion of the moment. So it's different from the kinds of things I usually pick, but this one definitely spoke to me. So this is Aerith's theme. So that was Eris's theme. James, what did you think of that piece of music? It's very, to me, it's very melancholic, and I think that it captures who Eris is as a person in this game very well. And that it's a little bit sad, but Eris's life and existence is a little bit sad. You were saying that a lot of the emotional moments.
I didn't feel that way at all about it. Actually, to me, when I thought of Eris for like the first like half of the game, I thought back to everything before the Honeybee Inn, which was her mischievously trying to dress you up as a woman for laughs. So to me, Eris was this mischievous character who, like, bends down, tilts a head, like laughs at you kind of character. So that's what I associated her theme with every time I heard.
Yeah, so it's interesting because to me, she was always someone who was, had a good heart and was a really good person, but she was lonely.
Yeah, to me, it was like the slums suck. And in the middle of the slums is this person out there selling flowers in this church in the most beautiful part of the town where the earth can actually get up. Like, she was that, like, ray of sunshine in the otherwise dreary cast to me.
Yeah.
So it was kind of... It actually, because I felt that way, it made that scene, like that really big important scene, not hit hard at all, because... It felt very strange to me that this theme I associate with joy and positivity was playing in this, like, very dark, tragic moment. It was, the juxtaposition ruined it for me almost, but I think that might be on me for the way I interpreted the music.
No, I totally got where you're coming from, because she is presented as fun and flirty for the most part in all of her interactions, but I guess it was the reality of her character that connected with me more, and the sadness of what was lost in that moment. So yeah, I also think the way in which it was presented, that is this theme playing during a boss battle, was very impactful for me. It not just playing during the cutscene, but just seamlessly continuing into the boss battle.
That was good.
Yeah, it's a small thing, but it does a lot to make you reflect on what had just happened instead of sinking into the usual triumphant battle music.
This moment, I think, is one where the character models do fail the game a bit. Basically, right after the thing happens, like, it cuts back to a pan of the characters, and Sephiroth is just standing there T-posing, and I laughed. I was like,
with his mouth open, right?
Yeah, and I was like, I know the pose they're going for, where he's like, look at me, look how grand this is, kind of thing, but he just looked like he was default, Source T-posing.
Yeah, I mean, I also liked how Cloud started speaking over him, which is a difficult thing to represent with just text boxes, but they do a good job of it. And this is once again where the direction of it, I think, is so strong. Like, it's like they have very limited...
I think voice acting would have helped that a lot. Like, it felt like he was supposed to be shouting there, but it was very... I don't know.
See, this is where my imagination comes to life again, I guess, because I have seen some of the way dialogue is delivered in the remake, and it makes me sick to my stomach. Like, I
agree.
I absolutely hate it. And I wonder if that's because they're just taking the lines of dialogue from the game word for word and just saying them. Whereas with it all written out this way, you have to kind of use your imagination a lot more. And I think it builds up to something grander than it is because of it.
In some ways, I think some of the word choice doesn't lend itself to imagination very well. Like, some of it's very flat. I basically found... There are a few scenes that I think were supposed to be, like, poignant that felt absurd to me. Like, number one was the statue crying in Red's section. That was... I don't understand how anyone can feel emotion during that scene. But the Eris thing I do, I don't know. Was it just me? Like, did you...
It didn't do anything for me either. I've heard a lot of people say this is a big thing for them, but for me, I just didn't care. And I kind of feel that way in a lot of the emotional scenes, but basically this one scene was one of the big exceptions for me.
Yeah,
it worked for me. And I think a large part of that was the music. Without the music, I don't think it would have struck me as poignantly as it did. But James, we're getting ahead of ourselves. There's one more aspect.
Actually, I do have a criticism of the music. Actually, now that I think about it,
Okay.
I think that the soundtrack never changes mid scene ever. Lots of games that I've played recently will change the soundtrack multiple times as the scene progresses. Like the characters are talking normally, and then suddenly there's a big reveal, so the music shifts to reflect the oh god, what this thing is actually happening. That never happens. So oftentimes what happens is that there's like upbeat music playing and then something bad happens and it doesn't switch and it feels weird.
Okay.
Um I don't know if you noticed that, but it stuck out to me a lot as I was playing this game.
No, I have to admit I didn't really notice it. Not to say it didn't happen, but it didn't really occur to me. So before we get into our spoiler section, there's one more big aspect of the game that I want to speak about. We've talked a lot about how the game does a lot to integrate different parts of its aesthetic. There's one more major component of the game, and that is its mini games. James, how did you feel about the mini games and their inclusion in Final Fantasy VII?
I think it makes a lot of sense from the point of view of this game is trying to throw as much variety at you as possible. Some of these were much better than others. Some of these were outright terrible. But for the most part, they didn't repeat these, which I really appreciated. And there were a lot of them, which even if I thought most of them weren't great, like I was kind of impressed as the game went on and they kept throwing new ones at you. I thought the motorcycle one was probably the best of these. I didn't mind snowboarding. It was most of the stuff in Gold Saucer, which I was like, I could do without this. Chocobo racing is the worst, for sure.
Oh yeah, unskippable chocobo racing, right?
Yeah.
You cannot skip the
No.
when you bet money on them. It's the whole race. That's your 4 minutes. Deal with it.
Yeah, if I didn't have the triple speed button during that section, it would have driven me nuts.
I thought it was a joke. Like I couldn't believe what was happening, and then I remembered the game I was playing. The other thing to mention is that not only does this game have a lot of mini games, it also has a lot of, I guess you'd call them quick time events or slow time events, where you need to interact with the screen in a particular way that isn't quite a mini game, but it's close to it. Like there's a bit where you need to pick up a key as Tifa while strapped to a chair by moving your limbs in different combinations. There's a bit where you need to resuscitate someone, which I couldn't figure out for 10 minutes because I'm an idiot.
You just need to keep doing it.
Yeah, I was like, am I failing this? Is this person going to die?
Yeah, there's no feedback. That thing was awful. I forgot about that. There's the sit-up thing.
The sit-up thing. There's moving between pillars in a mini stealth section.
I forgot about all of those. Yeah.
The game will stop you from doing its regular gameplay. There are even some puzzles, one of which is quite good. I quite like the library puzzle where you have to figure out the password. I felt quite smart when I figured that out.
I felt like that was the only puzzle in the game. Maybe the clock room, but it's not really a puzzle. It's kind of like you just do this in a sequence. Yeah.
Yes. My thoughts on these is that they're basically not good, but the game, like the combat is so bad that I struggle to call these things bad in comparison. You know,
they're not really. They're inoffensive mostly.
Did you find it clunky? Like there was one which I thought might be fun. It's the one where you dress up in a soldier uniform and you have to do the parade thing.
I hated that entire section. I
couldn't figure it out. Like it was annoying because I'm like, oh, it's kind of like a rhythm game. This could be fun. And then the controller was awkward and I couldn't seem to keep pace. And when you press a button, it goes into an animation that's too long that can't be cancelled. It doesn't feel good at all.
Honestly, that whole section felt like filler from start to finish. Like from the moment you get like helping the little girl on the beach to doing the stupid salute thing, I was like, I would like this if everything from the start of that section to you getting to Barrett's bit was like removed from the game, I would like it more.
But what about the dolphin jump, James? Did you like that mini game?
The dolphin jump, yeah, and the
Yeah.
running around the resort, and yeah, I don't know.
No, I agree. So yeah, I don't really like these mini games, but they're also
They're
not very
so
long.
short and
Yeah,
inoffensive.
there's
Yeah, honestly, it gives the game a bit of personality and breaks things up. I didn't hate them.
my favorite bit was the tower defense minigame, and I just like, what?
Oh,
And then
I just purposely lost and then
yes,
did the battle.
that's how you do it. And the battle is like
Not,
incredibly easy.
yeah.
And apparently you get an item for it that you don't get otherwise. So very strange. Very strange.
Yeah, very. I was like, so it was so hard. The actual tower defense seemed like it was impossible.
Yeah, I didn't try. You have to spend money as well, like the your in-game currency.
I did. I
Yeah.
was broke. I didn't have much money because I was like skipping some combat.
Yeah, so I think the minigames, they're a significant portion of this game, but the minigames are short. They tend to not repeat. So even if they're annoying, it's not annoying in a way that's deal breaking, because before you have a chance to get properly annoyed at them, you move on.
I want to point out when Metal Gear Solid 1 did this, you distinctly criticized it for doing this so much.
Example?
Like climbing down like the rope at the side of the building. Like it just has all of this like novelty stuff one after the other.
Yeah, I
think it was because you were hung up about it not having stealth.
Yeah, I think that was really it. It felt like it was there in place of something a lot more substantive. And what Metal Gear Solid 2 did differently was it did have big chunks of substantive fun. And the minigames in Metal Gear Solid 2 were really good as well, like the shooting the C4 on the boxes that triggered the C4 on the bridges and the detecting the bombs. Like those were minigames which were really, really enjoyable that compared to the simpler ones here. So I do think it is distinct.
I also think that like Metal Gear Solid 1 stealth gameplay was fine, like, and you would have preferred to do that more than the mini games by a lot.
Yes.
Whereas I think here the combat's like whatever, and so the mini games are also whatever, so it's fine.
And the mini games tended to be more tied to story bits, and I tended to enjoy the story bits of the game more. So in that context, they were less annoying because before and after mini games were usually story bits, or they were tied into the cinematic set pieces sometimes, like when you have to stop the train.
Yeah, can we derail a bit and talk about all of the like the filler episode stuff? How did you feel about that? To me, it massively reduced my enjoyment of the game. Like I was really, really hating playing it during the bit between Midgar and getting back to Nibelheim. Like that whole section, I was like, I hate this game. And then as soon as I got back to Nibelheim, I was like, this game's great again.
I think what we should do now is we should announce that we're moving into full spoilers. So I want to take the gloves off, and I think we should feel free to talk about any specific spoilers and elements of the game. Is that all right?
Yeah.
Okay, so yes, I think that the bit between you leaving Midgard and kind of getting to the Temple of the Ancients, and then the bit between that and getting to, I guess, the semi-climax at the northern crater, were pretty bad plot-wise. I don't think it was all bad though. So
there was stuff like Barrett's backstory was okay. That was fine.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to say. And then the connection to Dine, I have specific problems with a lot of this, but I wasn't like hating it or loathing the specifics of the story. It was just like, I think the big thing is the game loses its tight pacing. That first bit in Midgard is so well paced, and you're moving along at such a rapid pace, and then it kind of feels like you're dicking around in the world, not doing much of anything, random kind of following Sephiroth, and then he says something enigmatic and disappears again, and then you're chasing him again. It feels like you're meandering around the world.
The bit where you have to train the chocobo to cross the sand bit, I was like, why? What is going on here? Why am I doing this?
I looked up how to do this. I was like, what is happening here?
It was like very annoying.
Yeah. and I didn't really enjoy Golden Saucer very much.
I found that was actually probably the only enjoyable bit, honestly, of that whole
Interesting.
section. Was running around looking for mini games, not necessarily doing the mini games,
But
but
checking their existence.
yeah.
And then I think all of the stuff where you're gathering the 4 huge materia is not very good. That feels like a side quest. Get the
I didn't
4.
mind the bit where we went down into the base. That was okay. I didn't really like the tower defense bit, and the other one.
That whole thing was weird. That thing with the condor and everything. Like, it was visually striking, but I was like, what is even happening
What
right
is
now?
going on?
What has this
here?
got
Yeah.
to do with anything?
I
It's like,
mean, it's making the world have more stuff, right?
yeah,
Like
and
it's just world
those
building. And
individual bits are cool. Like Rocket Town,
Rocket Town, I liked a lot.
yeah, but it's like a cool thing that you
Weird
discover.
thing.
It's not necessarily like it doesn't feel like enjoyable or super relevant to the plot. It's kind of like the background introduction for a character.
Yeah.
And that's how I feel about, I guess, with the broad strokes plot. Definitely the pacing suffers in the middle of this game as you're just meandering from place to place, chasing after someone, and then doing this weird side quest to collect the huge materia before you actually get to the plot that matters. So I kind of agree with you, but for me, it was the combat that was the major thing that was annoying me, as opposed to the story beats I was experiencing. Even when it wasn't great, I wasn't loathing it the way I was loathing it.
Yeah, it's weird because when the plot was relevant, I found I enjoyed the combat more. Like, because I was more in the mood of the game. Like those bits at the start that you mentioned, all those combats I liked, even though it wasn't very hard because it was the high tempo, high octane going down into the reactor, blowing stuff up kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
When you're doing these random encounters while you're walking around in the desert, not sure where to go, feels all a bit pointless and silly. Whether or not I enjoyed the combat had more to do with whether I was liking where the plot was at the time.
Yeah, that's
And
interesting. I don't think I connected those things in my head. I just didn't like the combat at all.
yeah,
But you were also able to, cheat your way through it, unlike me.
that is true.
So
I think it contributed a lot to me enjoying the game more.
Can we go through some specific story moments? Because I want to, I guess, explain in more detail some of the things we said earlier about, Shinra being super evil and some of these quieter character moments doing more than a bunch of dialogue would have.
Yeah, sure.
So I think the place I want to go that I think touches on these things is definitely Barrett's backstory.
Okay.
So Barrett definitely feels like a very one-tone character. People always call him Mr. T, and it's easy to see why. He's very loud and aggressive and one note about saving the environment. We learn a little bit about Barrett's backstory in this middle section of the game, where it turns out that he used to belong to a coal mining town, and they did a deal with Shinra to create a Mako reactor and basically change to a different kind of energy for the betterment of the town. We assume that there's some kind of economic deal that they're doing, and Barrett is the one leading the town in a lot of ways, trying to convince the other people in the town to accept this deal. The thing that I find interesting about this, sorry, I'll continue. So the story continues, and it turns out that what happens is there is a attack on the plant. So Shinra decides to burn the town to the ground and kill all the men, women, and children in the town. And as a result, Barrett gets his hand shot off, as does his friend Diane, who seemingly falls to his death. And I think that this scene perfectly illustrates the good and the bad of the storytelling side of Final Fantasy VII. On the positive side, all of a sudden, to me, Barrett's attitude makes sense because he clearly blames himself for what happened, rightly or wrongly. And his super anti-Shinra, super aggressive, loud demeanor, it's like he's compensating for the fact that he feels responsible for working with Shinra proactively, and he bears the guilt of what happened to the town. So he feels what he needs to do is be loud and aggressive and I hate Shinra and the environment is all that matters. Not because that's who he was naturally, but because that's what he needs to do to justify how he's feeling and to retroactively make up for the things he's done. On the other
Yeah.
hand, you have the fact that Shinra is stupid evil. They burn a town to the ground, not because there were people in the town that participated in the attack. No, they just do it in a retaliatory fashion for no fucking reason whatsoever when those people could have worked at the reactor and had nothing to do with the attack. And I hate that. I hate that they didn't have the foresight to actually have Dine participate in the attack on the factory as the person who was resisting it, and Barrett having to struggle with the feelings to his friend, and then he sees the reaction from Shinra. There's so much you can do with this kind of story, and they do nothing with it. They just tell this stupid story of the evil people being evil. Even as good as the character stuff ends up being in my imagination, I just hate that they chose to make the story simple instead of diving into some of the potential nuance here. I've ranted for a long time, James, but I feel like that's like a really good example of what I think the game does well and what it does poorly in terms of storytelling.
Yeah, Barrett as a character to me, man, every single time they used his gun as a visual gag, like, killed him as a character for me a little bit more. Like, he feels like so ineffectual as a character. Like, every single time there is a villain on screen, he points his gun at them, shoots them, and misses like he's a stormtrooper, and it's like, it looks so stupid. It makes the character seem like so goofy and useless, and it's like I almost felt like they were doing it on purpose to make Cloud seem cool by comparison. They were just using this character as comic relief, like, to make the other characters look better, but he just seems so hard to take seriously, where every time anything would happen, he would say something stupid and then use his gun and do nothing with it, and then, like, never actually accomplish anything on his own. Like,
Yeah, there's a
I
thing
felt
going.
like
Sorry.
there was a lot of wasted opportunity with this character who could have been really awesome, and to me was like more comic relief than that.
There's a thing going on where Barrett is initially the leader of Avalanche, this group, but he
Oh my
eventually kind of
god.
becomes a follower of Cloud's. And if you see how he is in the flashback, you can see that he was once a far more calm and reasonable person in a lot of ways. And instead of him being like a mentor to Cloud, you're right, he's used as comic relief. The other thing is that I feel like he had a lot of potential to be the one having to mentally deal with the backlash of what Shinra did by dropping the plate on the slums, because in a way it's very similar to what happened at his coal mining town, where he feels and bears the responsibility for what happened there. Barrett should be the one bearing the responsibility and trying to struggle with the guilt of these retaliatory attacks by Shinra. Now, that's not his fault, it's Shinra's fault, but we've seen that Barrett clearly believes this, so he should be a bloody emotional wreck. And you're right, he just gets used as emotional relief, and it's kind of disappointing.
There's also a bit of a failure to kind of, they actually address this in the movie a bit. There's this child character who I didn't really like in the movie, but his purpose I enjoyed was that he is an orphan that was orphaned due to the eco-terrorism the main cast does at the start, right? Like, his parents were killed because Barrett and co blew up the Mako reactor near his parents' house. And I felt that that was something that the game really lacked, was this, like, you guys did this thing that had these awful consequences, and you did it again because you thought that it was worth it regardless of the cost. But they never really dive into that because it's probably a bit too dark for the tone that the game's going for. But I felt like it was a missed opportunity with how vehemently Barrett hates Shinra for destroying lives, and then he goes and does the same thing, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and
Um,
and that would be fine, except there's no rumination on it or consideration on it.
yeah.
What did you think of Dine? I thought it was almost funny how
Oh
how
my god, it
ridiculous he
was like,
was.
yeah, he was like, I was like okay for that kind of character. I was not okay to have him introduced and then, like, immediately go off the wall It felt like there was a real lack of nuance on this character who had the potential to be really cool. The bit where he's like, I'm gonna find Marlene and kill her so she doesn't have to deal with the harsh
So
reality
she,
of life.
she
It's like,
deserves
what
to
the
join her
fuck?
mother. I was like, what the fuck, man? What
It's
is
like, okay, I
um,
cannot take this seriously.
so one of the cool scenes that plays out is when you have been taken prisoner by Shinra for the first time, and then you wake up to this ominous music and you
Yeah,
see that everyone has been murdered, and you go upstairs to the president's room and you see the president of the company has a katana through his back. It's like incredibly eerie and is another one of these scenes that is done extremely well. But
they
then
ne-
we
they
get
never really elaborate on that either, because what actually happens is that throughout the game you're chasing these like Sephiroth things that disappear into the mist, and then they're kind of referred to as clones, but what they really are is like bits of Genova morphing into Sephiroth, and then because every time you find one, you fight the pure Genova form first, and then he dies. So what happened there, right, is that the Genova part broke out of that, container, then went up, turned into Sephiroth, killed the president, and then fucked off. But I don't think they explain that fully, like with dialogue. They just kind of think that Sephiroth was there.
but that's the intention, isn't it? Like
Yeah,
you're not
to
meant to know. You're meant to
yeah,
assume
yeah.
it's
You
Sephiroth.
meant to assume that it was, but it wasn't.
But
Yeah,
you see all the things that you're fighting in that area are all the weird monsters, and there's no music at all during this entire section.
yeah.
Or
It's
if there's
sick.
music, yeah, it's really good. But here's the problem, James. It's immediately undone when you meet the son of the CEO outside, and he starts making a speech saying, "You know what the problem with Shinra was? They weren't evil enough. We need to be more evil. That's what the problem is." And I was like, "Are you fucking kidding me? This is this. I couldn't believe it. It's like you have this amazing scene." And then you have follow it up with this. I don't
I actually
understand the
thought that
writing.
because what I was assuming was that I was like, okay, the president is like super comically evil, but they kill him early on and then introduce his son, who, by contrast, will seem more reasonable, right?
Hmm.
Like, I thought that's what they were doing. They were making this cartoonishly evil character to make the rest of the villains seem more, better written. But no.
No. Did you were you surprised? One of the things I was expecting to happen here was that I thought Cloud and Co would end up working together with Shinra when you move into the end game. And they kind of do that, but not in the way I was expecting. I thought they'd be like, you know what, we need to put our differences aside and work together against this greater evil. But they end up remaining enemies throughout the entire game. And I kind of didn't like that. I felt like it would have been a really cool story point if they ended up joining forces.
Yeah, in a way, I think it kind of goes against the main cast being this like force against the rest of the evils in the world. It's very one-dimensional, but I understand why they didn't do it.
The thing is, Shinra is basically trying to use technology to stop Sephiroth, and Cloud and Co are trying to use magic and the natural magic of the land. And yeah, they do end up incidentally working together, but it's not through any desire to work together. It's just they keep trying to kill each other, and they end up, achieving their plans independent of one another. And yeah, I just thought this was once again another missed opportunity. But I guess they posited Shinra as so evil and irredeemable that it wouldn't have made sense given everything that had happened so far.
No.
Yeah.
Uh, this reminds me of one funny bit that has definitely shown its age in the narrative. The bit that you mentioned with Barrett's backstory, where they were a coal mine and now they are a Mako plant which is destroying the planet. If only they had stayed as this pure, kind-hearted coal mine instead.
It's so funny. I mean, the Kyoto Protocol, I think, was in the same year that this released. So, I mean, it was
wow.
still in the early era of the green movement in a lot of ways.
Absolutely. It's very funny. Like when I watched the movie and it was like they've moved past this. Shinra's not doing the same, mining activity that they were previously. And Barrett calls Tifa and he's like, "I've found an oil deposit."
Good old oil saving the
Yeah,
planet.
yeah, nothing beats that.
So I want to delve a bit more into the specifics of Cloud. So I made a complaint in our Discord being like, what the hell's wrong with Cloud? Why are they following Sephiroth? They can't kill him. They could die at any point, and luckily the game did provide an answer to that, much to my embarrassment. How did you feel about Cloud's journey through this game and the twists in relation to his identity?
So I knew about this actually already before I went into the game.
I see. I didn't know this. I knew about, Sephiroth killing Eris, but I didn't know anything
I thought you
about
didn't. Yeah,
this.
I feel like this is the real twist that's like often scooped under the rug behind the more obvious one that everyone knows about. Yeah, I like the idea of it. In some ways, I feel like it made some of the characterization weaker. I kind of, although the reveal with the bit in the truck, I was like, that's sick. Like the way they foreshadowed that, and then like 10 hours, 20 hours later, like, oh, wait, actually, that's not what happened. I thought that was really cool. The presentation of all of this is awesome.
I was going to say that, like, I think that the flashback scenes and even the bit where Tifa and Cloud fall into the live stream together, and she's like investigating his memories and helping him put his psyche back together. Just really good stuff. This is the stuff I like about FF7. These more self-contained, smaller stories within the broader game, and every single one of these in relation to Cloud's identity, I think was really good.
I agree, yeah.
And like I said, I kind of alluded to it before, but it made me think of Tifa as a more interesting character because she's effectively gaslighting Cloud.
She's super evil.
Well,
like
she...
I was like, what the fuck? This person is like irredeemable. Like...
It's interesting. Like, yes, but her heart was in the right place. She wasn't trying... She thought that if she told him the truth, his mind would snap in half. So she was trying to guide him to the truth in a slower way or try to protect him. So yes, she did the wrong thing, but it wasn't from a sense of trying to do the wrong thing.
Yeah.
And all of those moments in retrospect made so much more sense to me, whereas before I was
like
kind of
before then she's like the most boring character in the game by like a lot. Yeah.
I liked the reveal at the train station as well, where she saw him like curled up and she's like, oh, I need to give this guy something to do so I can keep an eye on him.
Yeah, it was alright. I liked most of the way it was handled visually. Why is he so strong?
Cloud?
Yeah.
Because he's a clone of Sephiroth. Or a clone of Jenova.
Was he always?
Yep.
Or was he like did they do that after?
My understanding is that he, you know how he like used Sephiroth's saber, stabbed through him to throw him over the edge?
Yeah.
Pretty sure that kills him. Like he dies there. And then they reconstruct him as a clone from like he's dead, and then they remake him. So he has all of his memories, but it all gets a bit fucked up and messy because he's a clone and he's got Jenova in him. So he doesn't quite remember exactly what happened. So he remembers it from a different perspective. So everything up to that point is him. Then he gets made as a clone. Then he shows up back at the train station after escaping, or Coco just gets rid of him. He's a failure.
He's a failure.
Yeah, so maybe he just gets flushed out into the world, and that's when Tifa finds him again. So that's my understanding.
How does he beat Sephiroth on the mountain?
You mean the first time?
Yeah.
Listen, that doesn't... I guess you could say that doesn't make sense in the sense that Sephiroth is so strong that no one could use their strength when they're impaled by a sword to throw him over the edge or whatever. But I think the idea is that it was unexpected that he would do that. So Sephiroth trips over the edge, falls into the live stream.
He's also mentally in a bit of a weird space, I guess, like at that point. Like...
Yes. Yeah. But yeah, that's the idea. He's a weakling, but he kind of uses his body weight to push them over the edge into the live stream, which kind of pushes him to the northern glacier, and then he starts mind controlling things. I don't really know where the story goes from there, but Cloud doesn't like kill him by stabbing with a sword. He sacrifices himself to kill him.
Yeah, after that point, I think that's where the original personality of Sephiroth ends, right? He basically becomes a vessel for Jenova after that.
Listen, this is where I feel deeply unqualified to talk about the story. The story here is messy because there's clones and
I think it's better because it's messy, right?
It's definitely more interesting to analyze. I think that the thing that I think they could have done is not have as many clones. Jenova could have just been impersonating Sephiroth, and they could have just been Jenova.
And the idea is that all of her cells are connected wherever they are on the planet, right?
Yeah, but you don't need them to be Sephiroth clones. I don't think that's an essential aspect of the story.
No, I don't think so.
Jenova, who appears to be Sephiroth, you're chasing the one.
Although I do think it makes sense though, because some of her cells are inside Cloud, and she knows that he is good leverage on Cloud, so that's probably why she appears as him to Cloud every time she rocks up.
Yes, that makes sense because she can appear as that's right. She appears as different characters throughout the story.
Yeah,
makes a lot of sense. But Sephiroth that whole time that Jenova's doing all that shit is just in the crystal, I believe.
Yes, and even he doesn't talk like at all after that, right? Like he never speaks.
The bits in the town is that when you get to pass the barrier into the illusion. Are you speaking with Jenova there, or are you actually speaking with Sephiroth?
Unclear, I think.
Yeah, see, this is a thing. Like, obviously I've played through this game once. I've done a little bit of reading, but there are probably clear answers to this that the Final Fantasy experts know.
At the very end of the game, like during the boss fight, he doesn't talk, right? Like you go down there and he just fights you.
No, and the final cinematic bit where you use the limit break, it's just you both standing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I honestly, when we did System Shock 1 and Shodan didn't talk to you at all at the end, I thought that was super weird. Here, I thought it was quite cool, actually.
I mean, I guess for me, I was just confused while I was playing the game where Jenova started and where Sephiroth started, and
it got messy.
Yeah, it just got messy. I know people probably like that about the game. I think that this could have been streamlined a little bit, just a little bit. You can keep most of it there. Like all the stuff with Cloud's memory is really good, but the exact nature of Jenova and Sephiroth and stuff it almost read like sci-fi nonsense to me.
That's my favorite part of the story, actually.
Well, I'm more drawn into the concept of Hojo creating this thing, and I don't dislike it. I just wish I understood it a bit better. Maybe if I do more reading, I'll be all over it.
Well, I guess it's the thing that it's like the very fact that it doesn't make sense immediately is what draws me to it. Like I like trying to figure it out. If it was presented more clearly, I don't think it would be as intriguing to me. I think like the fact that it's like almost nonsense. And I think this is something that Square did very well consistently, like during these kinds of years between, when this game released, and maybe like early 2010s kind of thing, where lots of their stories would have lots of nonsense in them. Like Kingdom Hearts was like very famous for this. It was just filled with nonsense, but it was cool nonsense that like as a kid you were like reading forums, browsing people's crackpot theories, trying to figure out what the actual writing was, when the reality was there was like not that much there, right? Like it's all an illusion.
And totally
lots of mystery novels do this too, or like media where they create shitloads of intrigue at the start and then they have no way of delivering on that intrigue at the end. But it makes for very compelling reading at the time.
I totally get this, and I'm interested in FF7 as well. The one that really comes to me is Marathon. Marathon is a game I've considered doing for this podcast, actually, but when I see the gameplay, it always seems kind of medium. But a marathon is like an FPS series that was made by Bungie prior to them making Halo that released exclusively for Mac. Weird series. But the story in these games is like top tier science fiction stuff. And they are filled with mystery, particularly as you get to the later games. Like the story goes off the fucking rails. People have done insane analysis videos, and like they've tried to construct timelines that look kind of like, I don't know if you know of the movie Primer, but it's a famous, messy, confusing time travel film. And people have done similar things for this third marathon game. And even though I've never played the games, I have watched so many analysis videos on its story. Like it's that compelling. So yeah, I get it, and I am intrigued, and I think that sense of intrigue does keep you interested towards the end. I do still think the highlight is always in the moment with this game, though. When I think of this game, I think of those moments. I think of Cloud arriving at Nibelhelm. Is that how you say it, Nibelhelm?
I don't know, Nibelheim.
Nibelheim like with Sephiroth in that shot, and descending into the mansion and all of that, and then the town burning, and that was all fresh in my mind and how I conceive of this game, and that to me is even stronger than the mysteries that lie around.
Yeah, so I guess like broad strokes for me, all of the broad narrative stuff was awesome, and then all of the individual character moment stuff was pretty lackluster from my point of view. I basically very rarely connected with any of the characters talking on the screen, and enjoyed, stepping back and examining the bigger picture. Something about the way the characters, models, emote, and the dialogue, I found it so much easier to connect with the characters in Luna than I did with the characters in this game. Like, when you've got the characters' portraits and they're very clearly expressing, like, what they're feeling and what's going on in the plot, and it's very easier to empathize with them. Maybe I'm just autistic or something, but the like FF7 characters to me were like very, very flat. And I just could not connect with any of them.
It's so weird because for me, the absence of characterization was a boon because I could invent and imagine and try and read between the lines as to why these characters were the way they were. And I know that sounds insane. Like, I don't even quite believe it myself, but I vastly preferred the characters in this game to Luna's, who I found annoying. Whereas the characters in this game, I found that the understated nature of the dialogue and the absolutely underwritten characters ended up being a boon for me. That's weird, I know, but it's genuinely how I feel.
Yeah, Nash and Jess just were like so much more entertaining than any of the characters here, I found. Like, narratively, they were quite lacking in terms of like their backstory and
They had
stuff.
more personality.
Yeah. The characters with personality, like, I found this game did humor so badly. Like, I don't think I laughed a single time when they were comic relief.
Yeah, it's funny because I didn't like the humor in Luna either. I agree that the humor is like very basic. I didn't get anything out of humor. My thoughts are very much on, I guess, their deeper emotional perspectives and the things that drove them. I also want to take a moment to talk about Sid, who has the stupidest fucking moral dilemma in the game, as far as I'm concerned. So Sid starts a rocket with someone in a position inside the rocket where they will die if the rocket goes off. What would you do in this position, James? Would you stop the rocket, or would you hum and haw for 20 seconds about whether you should stop the rocket or not, and then eventually at the last moment decide to stop the rocket?
Well, it's his life's goal. To be fair, going to space for them is like...
Doesn't matter. It literally doesn't matter. Can you imagine NASA being like, yeah, there was a person that would have died, but we decided it was a good idea? No, it just would not happen. Ever.
I could absolutely see like a space like, do you really like the very first launch ever?
I think that if you were ever to make that decision, you would be considered evil.
I agree.
Sid
I
is
could
a
see
member
them
of your
making that.
party. It's not meant to be a moral dilemma. He's meant to be one of the good guys fighting against the bad guys. But
No,
it's
it's morally
presented
grey.
it's presented as a reasonable moral dilemma. Like, what?
It's very stupid. Yes.
It's so stupid. I couldn't believe it. I was like, why is he she's going to fucking die.
I'm trying really hard to like play devil's advocate here, but it's like I can't.
And like he hates her. Like he hates her guts. It's so funny to watch. It's even funnier because she's not like, let me out. She's like, I'm happy to die for you because I need to check if this piece of equipment was working or not.
He obviously secretly likes her, right?
Yeah, well, he
that was the
secretly
feeling
fucking
I
hates
got.
her. I mean, it's not secret. The point is that after that, I put Sid on my party because I thought it was funny. But Sid's character is not quite on the same level as the other ones because of that scene. I couldn't understand it. I guess he was working for Shinra at that time, right?
I liked him more than I liked Red. Gotta be honest.
Red was
like Red's character.
I know people love Red. I don't really get it.
I liked Katsith more because it was Reeve. I thought that was actually kind of cool. Like he went through this like little arc of.
Yeah, I kind of found the whole thing where he blew up the reactor to be blew up the temple to be completely meaningless because you knew it wasn't him. It's like, you're not sacrificing anything. Why are you?
And then the second one immediately
it's
rocks
like,
up.
what is happening? It's like, you can do this. You can do the right thing. I was like, what the hell? He's not doing anything. This is just the logical thing to do. It should have been the first thing suggested by any character.
I think it was like supposed to be like if you were a young child, you wouldn't realize, and then when they popped up, you'd be like, "Oh yeah, haha." But it's so obvious that it kind of kills the joke.
Also, it's like if you don't let me join your party, I'm going to kill Barrett's daughter. Nice.
Morally grey.
Morally grey. There's lots of parts of the plot, I guess, and some of these which are just like, I guess you could, if you want to be generous, you could say that they've been written very simplistically. And I think that the disappointing thing for me is that particularly, I think a lot of this setup and the world allows for a lot of complexity and nuance and storytelling, but they choose not to try to tell the story in that fashion. Would that ever... Sorry,
this is one of the I'm quite disappointed that the remake isn't a real remake and it's actually secretly, not so secretly, a sequel, is that they had a chance to fix all this and make it good, and now they're not gonna.
Well, this is a thing I've actually been thinking a lot about. They have gone a particular direction for the remake / sequel that seems like, I'm not sure it will end up being better than what I just played through in a lot of ways. Like, they've changed the combat a lot, which is good, but I don't know if they've changed it to something good. Maybe they have. It seems so radically different. But
it seemed fun in the demo.
From what I've seen of the way they've changed the story and characters to slow down the pacing and go for
that seems awful. I'm like, what the hell?
Like, I don't think it's going to be better. Like, maybe some people just want more and more and more, but when you just jam pack everything you possibly can, it costs something. This is a thing, and I think this is actually an interesting thing in relation to our podcast. Sometimes just adding more and adding open worlds and adding dialogue, adding voice acting, there is always a cost to it. You're not just improving on something, you're changing it in a fundamental way. And the end product, you may not realize what you've lost until you see that you got everything you wanted. So I don't know, man. From what I've seen of the remake, it really doesn't seem to hit on any of the same notes in the same way that this game does.
I feel this way about like people saying shit like, man, this game's turn-based. It would be better if it was an action game, or this is a 2D thing. It should be in 3D. Wouldn't that be cool? I get this feeling that people don't understand what they're asking for.
Yeah, I've seen the way the 3D world of Midgar in the first Final Fantasy VII game. But does that look better than these beautiful hand painted backdrops with fixed camera angles? No, it doesn't. Listen, I'm happy to accept that it's a different artistic direction, but I don't think it's better. I think fixed camera angles actually are one of the great losses of the modern era of video game design. I think 2D backdrops are beautiful. In the same way that Resident Evil uses its camera angles to frame scenes in very particular ways, produce unique kind of ways to view the environment. Final Fantasy does the same thing. It doesn't have a gameplay implication like Resident Evil does.
The one-time cinematography has a cross-section with gameplay.
Yeah, it's it's like that as well. Yeah, so you got anything else you want to cover, James?
That's pretty much all my main points, yeah.
Okay, well, because this is Final Fantasy VII, I think we are entitled to sneak in another music break. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. So we're going to go for a final music break, and we picked together and we kind of settled on a couple. We're going to go with Anxious Heart, which has a lot of the main theme interwoven into it, along with some of Eris's theme, and a bit more, dramatic tension. It's a bit of a softer, quieter theme, I think is really good. And they played it quite a lot throughout the game, and every time I quite enjoyed it. So this is Anxious Heart. Alrighty, and with that, we come to final impressions. I'm very interested to hear from Patrick about this one, as the last JRPG Final Impressions was quite the fireworks show, so should be good. Buckle in, let it rip, Pat.
Okay, so I think that one of the things that was very strange about Luna Silver Star Story to me, in particular, was that I didn't understand. I didn't get it. I fundamentally do not understand why people like those games. They're just so fundamentally repulsive to me in a way that's hard for me to articulate, really. And I tried with a big long article, although not everyone loved that one. With Final Fantasy VII, I have no problem with understanding why people love this game as much as they do, because there are aspects of this game which are absolutely brilliant. It's gorgeous. The soundtrack is amazing. Those cinematic moments are so good. I think the story has a depth and complexity to it that is enhanced by the way that the characters are underwritten, and it only grows in my mind as time passes. That being said, the combat here is fundamentally bad. Like, it is still a large portion of the game and it's bad, but it's not always bad. There are times where it's fine, and the materia system does offer a lot of novelty and intrigue to it. I hesitate to recommend it in a widespread way because there were times when I had to play this game and I really would have rather done anything else. Just because that grind of going through a dungeon for 40 minutes, 60 minutes, with all of that time spent watching animations it just feels so bad to me. It's wasting my time in a way that makes me really upset. But if you're the kind of person who can put up with mediocre gameplay and you don't mind the potential of this story's, I guess, complex themes ending up being kind of simple and not too interesting, I think that Final Fantasy VII offers a lot. And I think a lot of people would absolutely love Final Fantasy VII, even if they haven't, played many JRPGs of this era. I don't have a real strong modern comparison point because I don't play modern JRPGs, but I can say that there were aspects of this that were done extremely well and that I will probably remember for a long time. All that to say that I wouldn't recommend this game to myself, or if you feel strongly aligned with the way I view video games, the upside here is not worth it. But I think that there is a large chunk of the population that would enjoy this. And I think that my endorsement of the positive aspects of this should probably mean a lot more to you than it is coming out of someone who loves JRPGs typically. So I'm really glad I played it. I think that it's an interesting game that offered me more than I was expecting. But this game still has a lot of significant problems. It is messy.
Messy is a good word to describe Final Fantasy VII. I had very mixed feelings on this game going through it. There was times where I was really enjoying it, like the opening sequence, and basically all of the Midgar section I thought was awesome. Towards the middle of the game, there were these like very fillery segments that I felt were very out of place compared to the rest of the game. This is a very patchwork quilt mishmash of a game that's quality varies throughout its runtime. When it fires on all cylinders, is legitimately a fantastic title, but the low points can be quite low at times, particularly in the dungeons where the encounter rate is so high that even as somebody who loves exploration, I couldn't stand exploring because it was just kind of tedious. The animations and all of that kind of thing I'm less critical of just because I played on the Switch version, which I would 100% recommend to anybody who wants to play this game. You should use that version of the game. It is vastly superior than playing it the way it was originally created. I think that those kinds of flaws have gotten much worse over time and much more noticeable, with many modern titles having substantial quality of life features to kind of make up for it. The visual direction and soundtrack in this game are quite unmatched. I think this is one of the best soundtracks in a game ever, and some of the visual direction is just like outstanding, and even the low poly models that can sometimes drag down the dialogue and conversation, the direction shines through with stuff like Genova and all of the, the ancient city. There's just some amazing, eye candy here, even, many years after the game's release. So with that out of the way, I find myself in a very hard spot where I don't know how I actually feel about the game even now, almost a month after finishing it. There are some really great moments, there are some really bad moments, but I don't regret playing the game, and I think like Patrick, I think there's a lot of people who would like this one, so if you are interested in Final Fantasy VII, I cannot, I would not tell you not to play it, but I wouldn't tell somebody to go out of their way if they had no interest to begin with. So, bit of a mixed bag here. I think that a lot of it has aged, but there's something worthwhile here still to this day, I think.
Can I ask you, James? You quite liked Luna. How would you say this stacks up against it?
There was this distinct period at the start of my playthrough through Luna where I was like, I just played it like 3 days in a row without stopping. I never felt that way about this game, although I do think that FF7 is a better game than Luna for the vast majority of people. There are things that I really specifically liked about Luna, the 2D visuals, for example. I prefer to most of the visuals in this game. Like, obviously, the good visual direction here, like, trounces anything in Luna, but the general aesthetic and visual quality of stuff like the bosses I found to be higher in that game.
That makes sense.
The music I also thought was good. I kind of liked the novelty of the way the battle system worked, which is more than I can say for the battle system here. The customization is non-existent in Luna, which was the biggest complaint I had. The story is and the setting massively worse than FF7, but I think it was just like a time and place thing. Like, if I was to play Luna now, I might not enjoy it as much, but few years ago, like, I loved that playthrough, whereas here I felt like so for most of the runtime.
I think the highs of FF7 make it feel like it stands out.
Absolutely.
That's how I feel. Yeah. Even with the rest of its problems, the highs are so high. Luna's probably a more consistent game.
Luna's biggest problem is the way that it just does not break its combat up. Like, you'll have a story section and then you'll have like 2 hours of dungeon
fights
or something. Yeah. Whereas
and
FF7,
eventually you run out of mana and health and you have to go back in again slightly stronger.
For a large portion of FF7's runtime, you'll do like 2 battles in a row, right? Like, they split it up so much that it kind of hides the fact that the battle's kind of boring because you only do 1 or 2 at a time, other than those shitty dungeons with the huge encounter rates.
And those dungeons aren't long.
No,
like they're not dungeons
like
a
3
Zelda
rooms
dungeon.
long, right?
Yeah,
and
it just feels long.
It just feels long because there's so many dudes in them. Yeah.
Oh well, James, how do you feel that we're now officially a JRPG podcast and that's all we're allowed to play?
That's great. I've got a couple lined up for the next few episodes. I hope you're excited. I also want to say, I didn't get to mention this on the episode. The final section of this game was excellent. I thought the last boss, the last 3 bosses, were all sick. The music that plays in the final boss is super iconic. And the 3-minute long cutscene attack was hilarious.
I got wiped by a little guy with a knife, and then I looked it up, and he has 44,000 health, and I was like, "What the fuck is happening?" Actually, there were a few enemies in that last dungeon that were genuinely tough and were instantly killing my party members as I was trying to get through them. Like, they just cast a spell and kill one of my... I was like, what's happening? So I backed out and did a little bit of grinding, but mainly I was just acquiring equipment and getting some enemy skills because I didn't have a lot of those. So I was kind of like building up my roster of enemy skills.
There was that enemy in the final dungeon that asks for an elixir, and if you give it to them and then kill them, like... they die in 1 hit, but then the battle ends in like 4 materia level up because it gave you. Yeah. It's crazy.
So much XP.
Yeah, it's sick. Yeah.
Yeah. So I agree with you, James. That final bit was good. It was tough, but it was the last thing. So I mean, fair play.
And then
it would have been
the cutscene at the end goes for so long too. I was so surprised.
Yeah. What do you think of that ending where it seems like humanity has died off or something? I was like, I don't know if this is this is as good a thing as you think it is. Like, I kind of like humanity.
Yeah, I don't think it was trying to show that they were dead, more that like the industrialization of Midgar was. Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. See, there's a film called Princess Mononoke. Have you seen that one?
Of course.
Yeah. I think that film does a really good job of... that's an example of a film tackling this
the man versus nature thing, yeah.
Yeah, and I think it does it in a far better way than FF7 does. I think that the leader of like the mining town is such an interesting character. Like she's really nuanced and interesting, and mainly because she's treating her workers so well. Like she's pulled all these people out of poverty, and she just doesn't see a problem with trying to expand humanity. But and that film ends up being very pro nature. But it does it, I think, in a far better way than Final Fantasy VII does. So
Seven has no nuance to any of it. It's a bit,
yeah.
yeah.
There was a little bit, like there was a couple of times where you spoke to random NPCs and they talked about like how great it was, all the things that Mako Energy was allowing them to do. And as I was watching this, I was like, I understand that you want to destroy all these reactors, but do you think people are actually going to be happy to lose access to the quality of life benefits that they currently enjoy? Do you think people will actually support that? I think the answer is no, they won't.
I agree. We are going to destroy our Earth because electricity is good.
Well, yeah, and the reality is a far more boring grind as opposed to, Greenpeace blowing up nuclear reactors and, blowing up coal plants. But that's the kind of ideas that they could have explored and they didn't. So I know it's just a game for kids or whatever, but I always like to aim high, and I think that these games are capable of tackling these subjects. And I wonder if the new ones does. I know a lot of people rant about how amazing the MMO Final Fantasy is and how good its story is. So I wonder if there's... Oh, really? Okay,
so I think that this, from what I can... So a bunch of my friends have tried playing 14, and it's like... It's like 100-hour grind to get to like the bit where the story picks up
But is that part of the story good?
I don't know. They haven't got to it yet. I'll let you know once my friends...
They haven't got to it.
A couple of them have recently picked it back up again, so maybe...
Because Joel plays... He's massively into that, right? We should ask him on the Discord server.
Yeah. I know people who do like it. But yeah,
I do wonder.
I got filtered a bit, and this is somebody who played World of Warcraft for many years. I got filtered by the grind at the start.
Yeah, I don't think I'm ever going to be playing that one.
Yeah, when are we doing 10 though? I can't wait.
Do you actually want to do 10?
I don't know. I don't think I do. I think it's like too special of a game to me to want to like analyze in this way.
Let's do 10-2. Let's just start with 10-2.
Oh, I'd be down, actually. I think it'd be very funny.
I go into 10-2 with no knowledge or content. I mean, that's not true. I've actually listened to multiple podcasts on Final Fantasy X, so I know what happens in relatively great detail.
Wow.
It seemed better than playing the game,
Yeah,
at least I get all the good story bits.
Yeah, the real question is, when do I get to pick Etrian 4?
Not anytime soon, mate. But anyway, thank you. I just want to say a big thank you to everyone who's stayed with us this far. We are the Retro Spectives podcast. You can find all of our content on our website, which is rspodcast.net. It has all of our 117 episodes there. We've also got a link to all of our social media stuff, the primary one of which we use is our Discord server. If you have any opinions, comments, concerns, or recommendations about what we should tackle next, we would love if you would drop by and drop us a recommendation. We're always looking for interesting games to play. It doesn't need to be a big hit. We've covered lots of cult classics like Gorky 17, and discovered that a lot of these cult classics are just
Gorky was
wonderful
so good.
games.
What the hell?
Yeah, really interesting games. So if you have any recommendations, particularly for the more interesting games, we would love to hear them. And of course, we also have a Buy Me a Coffee page if you would like to support us monetarily. We recently enabled subscriptions after realizing that it wasn't an option for a long time, which was quite silly, but there we go. It's turned on now, so you can either do a one-off donation or do a subscription. So, James, Final Fantasy VII is done. I'm glad to have scratched that one off my list, and it is now my turn to pick. And we're going to be going with another
stealth game
episode. Stealth game, baby. It's the only way to get me out of our groove. I've paid the price and done a JRPG. I get to pick a stealth game.
Wait. I want to check. Let me see. What did we do immediately after Luna? Was it a stealth game?
39. Was it Hitman Codename 47? I wouldn't be surprised.
Oh, it might. I think that might have been no, because it was Castlevania, and
the
then
first one, yeah.
so let me see. It was season 2, and we did Castlevania, Luna, Silver Star Story Complete, and then Hitman.
Hitman, yeah.
Well,
so we're just continuing the tradition.
Yeah, that's very funny, isn't it? Because the game we're playing this fortnight is Hitman Blood Money, right, Pat?
Exactly, yeah. I've been wanting to play this one for a long time.
Did you plan this out? Did you do this intentionally?
Hell no. I think
I'm glad we figured this out, though.
I think this was subconsciously. It's like I was suffering through the JRPG, so I was like, please, I want to play a stealth game. And then I was like, you know what? Hitman Blood Money sounds about right. So we're skipping Hitman Contracts, not because it's a bad game, but because it remakes 5 of the missions from the original Codename 47.
I gotta be honest, I think I would feel nauseous playing those levels again. I was not a fan of the first game.
They're apparently mostly remade into good versions.
Okay.
Of the original. So I don't think they're bad. It's more that I wanted, we release episodes every 3 weeks. So I'd rather do the next substantive entry in the game. And I know that a lot of people consider Blood Money to be the best of these classics. I really loved Silent Assassin after being pretty down on Codename 47. I think you were a bit lower than I was.
Yeah, I didn't recommend number 2. I thought the soundtrack was really good. I thought there was like 3 good levels, and I still thought that some of them were a bit tedious and there was a lot of repetition. I've actually started Blood Money already, and I already like it a lot more. I think it's massively easier, which I'm kind of curious. I'm like, Patrick's actually going to secretly hate it because it's too easy. But for me, the quality of life it's introduced so far has made the series now enjoyable to me. So I'm hoping that it continues because there's been some good levels so far.
It just depends, because I think that this is where the series hit its stride in terms of coming up with fun assassination
it's
techniques.
So creative already.
Yeah. So I think that if it leans into that, there's enjoyment to be found there as opposed to pure mechanical purity, I guess. So, but I haven't played it yet. I'll just have to wait and see. But this is definitely one I'm excited to try out. And to, in my mind, round out the classic Hitman trilogy. I don't really have an interest in playing the ones after this. I hear they turn into more action-y games. So this is probably where our Hitman journey will end. So I hope it impresses.
It's got a lot to live up to. So thank you, everybody, for listening to FF7. I hope you enjoyed it. And we'll see you next time for Hitman Blood Money.
See you then, everyone.